4月17号，
国际前沿的生活方式医学，
把大量的临床案例一一呈现给大家。把大量的临床案例一一呈现给大家。
国际营养和生活方式医学峰会。
Best wishes and my heartfelt support to you.
Grand success for your conference.
目前，心脑血管疾病已经成为威胁人类健康的重要的健康杀手。
正确的饮食与生活方式是导致心脑血管疾病的重要危险因子。
在被迫选择手术和化学药物以前，其实还有很多非药物干预的方法可以选择。
生活方式医学和传统医学最大的不同是逆转疾病的原因，而不是控制疾病的指标。
从营养的角度去看
心脑血管疾病的成因，以及
如何吃和生活能
逆转康复心脑血管疾病，
轻松地搞定全人乃至全家的健康。
4月17号，柬埔寨。
大家好，我叫丹娜，我患有家族性高胆固醇血症。
我叫向小红，诊断为冠心病，我的冠状动脉有3处堵塞。
我叫朱慧慧，我被诊断为 IgA 肾病。
我叫李明成，20多岁就已经有高血压、肝血管瘤、肥胖症、白癜风。
我叫马泽康，糖尿病的并发症，心脏做灌一个堵了95%，一个堵了99%。
我的老伴先后2次因为脑梗住院治疗，在2013年他突发严重的心梗。
下面我给大家看一组数据：总胆固醇8.01，我还有脂肪肝、皮肤大片过敏、腰痛、腿痛。
我开始服药，但是胸闷心悸的症状还是不时会出现。
随着年龄的增长，身体机能的衰退，出现了低蛋白血症、高胆固醇、高甘油三酯、甲状腺功能异常及甲状腺结节。脸上的红晕悄悄地褪去，原本白皙的皮肤开始发黑。
医生说我这些都是非常危险，没有办法拿这个药物来治疗的。
我在太原做了个心脏支架手术，这4种药叫终身服药。
医院多次下达病危通知书，电击了5次，还昏迷不醒，并安装了2个支架，才奇迹般的活了下来，并因心功能完全丧失了劳动能力，办理了病退，每月需要1000多元的药费不说，而且他常常还会心沉、胸闷、心绞痛，一般家务都做不了。
我下定决心自己去改变生活方式，来改变这种现状。
尝试改变饮食结构，
改变生活方式，
决定改变自己的生活习惯。
为了保命，从此我的老伴改变了饮食结构。
我自身的高血压、肝血管瘤也无药而愈，
身体各方面有所改观，就是身体状况比以前好多了，腿脚比较麻利，轻松多了。
我胸闷、心悸的症状就越来越轻了，心情也越来越好。原来堵塞70%的地方，现在变成了60%。原来2处20%的地方，1处变成了10%，另一处不见了。这个结果让我感到很惊喜。
整个人的身体状态有很大的改变，腰腿都不痛了，而且几10年的胃病也好了，皮肤也不过敏了。
我的身体也在慢慢的发生着变化，体重指数降低为标准的21。红晕也悄悄地回到了脸颊上，胆固醇指标、甲状腺功能3项指标正常了，甲状腺结节从弥漫性的减少为几个，所有指标的好转让我看到了希望。
我老伴的身体呢发生了巨大的变化，说话利索，走路也不瘸了，心功能恢复到了1级，而且呢还重返单位上班了。祝福大家健康快乐每一天。诚邀你参加4月17号第2届国际营养与生活方式医学
亲爱的观众朋友们，晚上好。时间过得真快啊，我们一晃就来到了我们的晚上的这个国外嘉宾专场。首先我要特别感谢从早上一直陪我们到现在的我们的志愿者还有我们的这个社群包括我们一些非药而愈的这个粉丝们。我觉得你们也真的很辛苦你们是从早上到现在，有的小伙伴是一场都没有落下，都不忍心落下这个直播，也非常的感谢你们但是我们这个晚场的直播呢是更加的精彩，然后也希望所有收听的家人们朋友们、观众朋友们，你们能把这个直播间我们的这个非药而愈平台的这个直播间以及这个视频号，还有这个徐佳博士的微博直播。我们都可以动手指转发出去发给更多需要的朋友们，然后利益到更多的人。好，那我们现在就是开始这个晚场的直播。晚场呢一共是有三位国外的嘉宾，尼尔·巴纳德博士、汉娜·克列欧沃博士，以及我们著名的这个心脏病的这个专家医生我们世界顶级的这个医生Esselstyn医生他们将给大家带来这个精彩的这个演讲，还有这个过后的我们是直播问答，由博士和这些大咖们去互动，然后去答疑，然后大家其实都是可以期待一下。好，那我们第一位这个出场的嘉宾呢是我们的尼尔·巴纳德博士。巴纳德博士呢是美国责任医师协会的创始人、主席。是美国心脏病学会 ACC 的院士，乔治华盛顿大学医学院兼职医学教授，华盛顿特区巴纳德医疗中心的创立者。他呢担任临床医生营养指南的主编，转写了100多本的科学出版物和20本的专著。巴纳德博士呢号召将疾病预防与膳食营养作为联邦政策与医学实践的新重点，已被采纳成为美国医学会的策略方针。他在2018年呢获得哥伦比亚特区医学会杰出服务奖。今天呢，巴纳德博士将给我们带来题为“健康心脏所需的营养”的主题演讲。欢迎巴纳德博士。
Hi, I'm Dr. Neal Barnard with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Let's talk about nutrition for a healthy heart. Worldwide, we see heart disease as a leading cause of both morbidity, that is, being sick and ending up in the hospital, and mortality, meaning dying. And yet there's a tremendous amount that we can do to prevent these bad outcomes. And the key is good nutrition. First of all, what are we talking about? At the top of this screen, you see a healthy artery. The red blood cells can course through that artery, carrying oxygen to your tissues and giving you energy. But in the middle diagram, what do we see? We see the beginning of what looks like a blister forming in the wall of this artery. That's an atherosclerotic plaque. And what it actually is overgrowing muscle cells and lipid and debris that are forming in response to bad cholesterol irritating the artery wall. At the bottom, we see that blister, that atherosclerotic plaque, has burst. And as it bursts open, it triggers the formation of a blood clot. And that blood clot acts just like a cork in a bottle. It stops the blood flow completely. And that's what we call a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. For many people, that's the final event of their lives. Can we prevent this? We certainly can. Let's look at the basics. First of all, a long time ago, many decades ago, researchers started noticing that the higher your cholesterol level, that is, the higher the amount of cholesterol in your bloodstream, the higher your risk of dying of heart disease. This was from a study called the Multiple Risk Factor Intervention Trial, done decades ago, and it showed very clearly that the higher your cholesterol, that is, the further you go out on the right of this slide, the more likely you are to die of a heart attack. So what causes cholesterol levels to go up? The number one thing is bad fat. That means saturated fat. Saturated fat is the kind of fat that at room temperature is a solid. Every 1% that your saturated fat in your diet increases, your LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol increases by 2%. So the more saturated fat that you have, the more bad cholesterol you have in your blood. But it's not just that saturated fat. It's also cholesterol itself. Cholesterol in your diet, in eggs, in dairy products, in meat, the more cholesterol that there is in your diet, the higher your blood cholesterol. The effects of dietary cholesterol are not as great as the effects of saturated fat, but it adds to the problem. So where do I find these things? Where does saturated fat show up? Where does cholesterol show up in my diet? Well, animal products, as you can see here, have quite a lot of them. You can see the saturated fat content of, say, roast beef. In a 100-gram serving, 3.4 grams of saturated fat, 83 milligrams of cholesterol, that's a lot. Chicken, with or without the skin, is still a significant source. And look at salmon. Some people imagine that salmon must not have bad fat, it's only got healthy fat, doesn't it? No, that's not the truth. If you look at salmon, it's got as much cholesterol as beef and just about as much bad fat too. That means it's going to raise your cholesterol. Cheese, eggs, all of these contribute. But the point is, cholesterol is in animal products. Saturated fat is mainly in animal products too. What about foods from plants? Well, look at beans and rice and broccoli and sweet potatoes. You notice in the cholesterol column, you see a big 0. They're not from animals at all. These are plant foods and they don't have cholesterol. And look at the saturated fat content. Extremely low for all of them. Very, very low. So when it comes to avoiding cholesterol and avoiding saturated fat, getting away from animal products and building your diet from plant-based foods, that's really the secret. Now, let me look at what what foods may not have. If you look at, say, beef, the fiber content of beef, 0. Vitamin C, 0 too. And that's true for all the animal products. But look at broccoli and kale and chickpeas and an orange. Do they have fiber? They've got vitamin C. Well, why do I care about that? Fiber helps your body to eliminate cholesterol. It's also helpful for a healthy digestive tract. Vitamin C is an antioxidant that helps stabilize compounds in your blood, and that can help you in many ways. And antioxidants are part of the stabilization process to protect the artery wall. Animal products don't have them. Plant products are rich in them. Okay, now let's talk about cholesterol itself in foods. I was talking about cholesterol and I was talking about saturated fat. They are not the same thing. Cholesterol is not the same as fat. In meats, cholesterol is found mainly in the lean portion. Let me say that again. The cholesterol is in the lean portion. So if you're eating chicken without the skin, you're still getting plenty of cholesterol. If you're eating fish, even the leanest fish, you're getting plenty of cholesterol. And you're getting a lot of it if you eat egg yolks. But plants have essentially no cholesterol at all. Okay, now if I want to lower LDL cholesterol, that's bad cholesterol, and I want to bring that down so that I don't have a heart attack, what do? I avoid the meat. I avoid dairy products too. That means cheese and yogurt and whole milk, because these foods have a lot of bad fat in them. I want to avoid eggs. Eggs are a source of saturated fat, but they are the biggest source of cholesterol. We also want to go further. There are some plant products that are not good. Hydrogenated oils. These are the oils sometimes used in frying, where through a chemical process, a liquid oil is hardened up. That's hydrogenation. Also coconut oil and palm oil, they can raise your cholesterol level too because they're very high in saturated fat. I would avoid them as well. There are things you want to increase. Plant-based foods in general are great, but there are certain foods that have special effects. Oats, beans, soy products. They seem to have a special ability to lower bad cholesterol, and they should figure in your daily routine. Okay, triglycerides. You'll see triglycerides on blood tests as well. Triglycerides are blood fats, and if your triglycerides are high, the secret to lowering them, avoid animal products, but also avoid high glycemic index foods. What do I mean by that? High glycemic index means they spike your blood sugar. So sugar itself or white bread will elevate your blood sugar rapidly. Avoiding those foods will help you to lower your triglycerides. But you don't want to avoid carbohydrates. Carbohydrate-rich brown rice and beans and starchy vegetables, they're all great for you. Okay, exercise also helps bring down triglycerides. All right, so what are the other contributors to heart disease? We've talked about cholesterol, but it's not the only factor. High blood pressure can contribute to heart disease as well. Hypertension means simply high pressure in your arteries, and it's measured with two numbers. The first number, or systolic blood pressure, is the pressure during a heartbeat. The second number, or diastolic, is the pressure between beats when the heart muscle relaxes. So with every heartbeat, you get two numbers. As your heart squeezes, your blood pressure goes up to the systolic number. As it relaxes, it goes down to the diastolic number. So if a doctor says your blood pressure is 120 over 80, that means with each heartbeat, it's going up to 120 and relaxing down to 180. Which number matters? Both of them. You want them both to be healthy. And below 120 over 80 is where you want to be. The first step toward lowering your blood pressure is to limit salt. You don't have to avoid it completely, but you want to keep it low. Sodium raises blood pressure. And sodium, where do I find it? There's a little bit in plant foods, not really very much, unless it's added at the factory. Look at this, a potato. A medium potato has 13 milligrams of sodium, that's not much. But turn it into potato chips, you've got 330 milligrams of sodium in the potato chips. It's all added at the factory. But the biggest source of sodium might surprise you, or a bigger source than potato chips is cheese. Cheddar cheese and Edam cheese, processed cheeses, can have 350, 500, or even as much as 800 milligrams of sodium in a typical serving. You want to avoid these products. Okay, now, but there's more to it. You might already be aware that sodium raises blood pressure, but so does grease. The grease that's in a burger or in fried chicken can make your blood more viscous, more thick, more like oil, less like water. And when your blood is thick, it's harder for your heart to push it along to get blood circulation going. If your blood is more like water, it's really easy for your heart to push and your blood pressure doesn't have to be so high. So what do? Avoid the greasy foods. If you avoid meat, cheese, and other foods, you're not only avoiding the saturated fat and its effect on your cholesterol, but you're avoiding the effect of that fat on your blood pressure too. Bottom line, to lower your blood pressure, you want to avoid sodium. It's a good idea. Instead, get the plant-based foods, but also avoid the greasy foods like meat, cheese, and fried foods, because they tend to raise blood pressure too. All right, will it actually work? It sure will. Back in 1997, the DASH study was conducted, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Researchers brought in a large group of people, 459 of them, and they did two things. Number one, they increased their vegetables and fruits. They also did something else. They reduced their meat and reduced their fat. And if you've been thinking about what I've been saying, you're thinking, okay, that's going to help me. Vegetables and fruits in their natural state don't have much sodium. I'm getting rid of that. I'm getting rid of the sodium. That's good. And if I reduce meat, reduce the fat, then my blood viscosity will be healthier. Good on you. That's exactly right. Let's look at the numbers. This is systolic blood pressure. The top line there are people who did not do anything. They made no diet changes. They're the control group. And as you can see, not much happened with their blood pressure. The second line, these are people who only increased vegetables and fruits. That's all they did. Their blood pressure lowered a little bit. That's good. Fruits and vegetables help you avoid the sodium, and they're also rich in potassium, which helps lower blood pressure a little bit. But that third line, that one that really dives down, these are people who increased vegetables and fruits, and they also reduced meat and reduced fat. And that's the best of all worlds. Now, this is systolic blood pressure. That's the top number. This is diastolic. That's the bottom number. And you see exactly the same pattern. For blood pressure lowering, you want to increase vegetables and fruits, and you want to throw out the meat and the fat. And if you do that combination, not only does your blood pressure drop, but look how fast it drops. Within about 2 weeks, your blood pressure is already substantially lower. So you don't have to wait a year or 2 years for your blood pressure to come down. It happens fast when people make diet changes. Okay, so we have talked about how I can bring blood pressure down. To put it simply, plant-based foods, and you already wanted plant-based foods to lower your cholesterol. Reduce salt and sodium. Exercise is good. 2 more things. You want to limit your alcohol intake and avoid tobacco. Put that together, you got low blood pressure. All right, by now you might be thinking, isn't this wonderful? I can get off my medicines. Maybe I won't need my medicines anymore for my cholesterol. I won't need medicines for my blood pressure. Well, maybe. Only stop your medications with medical supervision. The reason I say that is uncontrolled blood pressure can be very dangerous, even fatal. So this is not a time to stop medicines on your own. Talk with your caregiver about when and whether it's the right thing for you. Okay, let's look at clinical trials of plant-based diets to see, does it really work? It should, because with a plant-based diet, I'm avoiding cholesterol, I'm avoiding animal fat, my cholesterol level ought to drop, that should help my heart. My blood pressure ought to improve, that should help my heart. So does a plant-based diet really help prevent heart disease, or can it help reverse it? You bet. Medical history was made back in 1990. Dr. Dean Ornish looked at whether people who had existing heart disease could get better. Simply put, he looked to see if a healthy diet could take that ugly-looking artery at the bottom and make it look like that wide-open, healthy artery at the top. He did not use medications. He didn't use surgery. What he did instead was a simple lifestyle intervention. Vegetarian foods. Okay, vegetarian foods for heart patients. That helps them avoid the cholesterol, the fat, and it helps them increase fiber. Okay, good. Vegetarian foods, half-hour walk every day. Try to manage stress. Challenging for some people, but that was the idea. And avoid tobacco. Very simple. No drugs, no surgery, just these 4 simple lifestyle steps. What happened? After a year, total cholesterol dropped 24%, compared to a control group where it barely dropped at all. LDL cholesterol dropped 37%, that's bad cholesterol. Body weight dropped by 22 pounds, and in 82% of the participants, the arteries were opening up enough so that you could see a measurable difference in 82% of the participants in 1 year. No drugs, no surgery. Lifestyle can reverse existing heart disease. All right, let me show you what it looks like. After 5 years, researchers looked again at the participants, and what they showed was that those who were getting worse were continuing to get worse. These are people in the control group. The people in the treatment group were getting better, and after 5 years, they were continuing to get better. And what really mattered was, do you have a heart attack? Do you need a bypass or angioplasty, or do you die? And these things were much less likely to occur in the intervention group compared to the control group. Bottom line, we want to do a plant-based diet along with an otherwise healthy lifestyle. This was not the only study. Researchers also looked in India to see if something similar could be done in the population there. This was in the Mount Abu Open Heart Trial. It was done in Northwest India. What they did was they invited people who had moderate to severe coronary atherosclerosis. That means narrowed arteries. And they gave them a near vegan diet. It was low-fat vegetarian, almost vegan. They also gave them a little bit of exercise and some stress management, but they did not use cholesterol-lowering medications. Well, what did they find? They did angiography, meaning they measured the artery blockages at the beginning and again after 2 years. And those people who were highly adherent to the diet and program had regression of their atherosclerosis, meaning it was going away, in 91% of the participants. If they didn't adhere so well, they had just sort of medium adherence, 88%, okay. The people who did not adhere, the low adherence, only 12% of them had regression. What am I learning? I'm learning that if I follow this diet, my chances of having my heart disease start reversing are enormous. And how much? Well, when they looked at how many had their lesions actually regressed by as much as 10%, which is a huge regression, for the high adherers, it was about 51% of them had that much regression in the first 2 years. To spell out what this actually means, even a tiny reopening allows a lot of blood to get through. If you remember from your physics, the flow through a vessel is proportional to the 4th power of the radius. This won't be on the test. But what it means is that a very small opening of the blood vessel allows blood to rush through. It allows oxygen to get through. It allows that chest pain, that angina, to go away. So adhering is what you want to do to a healthy diet. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. This is an angiogram. This is an angiogram of a doctor, actually. He was a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, and this is not a good-looking artery. That artery is all crinkly from atherosclerosis. He could not receive a stent because of the anatomical location of the lesions. He also could not tolerate cholesterol-lowering drugs. With basically no option, he started a low-fat, completely plant-based diet, a vegan diet. And what happened? After 32 months, this is what happened. That artery opened up again. That's a healthy-looking artery. So the old idea was heart disease is a one-way street. It'll never get better. The new idea is that this is a dynamic process. It's a two-way street that can get better as long as we make real diet changes. Okay. Now, when I speak about real diet changes, some people are going to say, okay, we hear heart doctors talking about Mediterranean diets, the diet of southern Italy. It's not exactly vegan. It's got fish and little bits of meat and maybe the occasional bit of cheese. Will that do it? Well, let's have a look. The Predimed study was done in Spain. It was a good study. They brought in more than 7,000 participants. Everyone was at high risk for heart disease. Most of them were overweight. And they split the participants into 3 different groups. The first group got a Mediterranean diet plus olive oil. By Mediterranean diet, what we mean is reducing the amount of meat, favoring white meat instead of red meat. So that might mean more fish, chicken instead of beef, that kind of thing. And instead of butter or pork fat, use olive oil in cooking. The next group was a Mediterranean diet plus nuts. And same story, more vegetables, more fruits, less meat, less dairy, less eggs, that kind of thing, but have nuts. Third group, control, meaning no change at all. So all 3 of these groups followed their respective dietary assignments, either Mediterranean plus oil, Mediterranean plus nuts, or no change. And then researchers looked to see who had a heart attack, who had a stroke, who died. Let me first show you what the diet consisted of. The Mediterranean diet recommended oil and nuts and fruits and vegetables, but it also recommended fish. And it recommended legumes like beans and sofrito, which is a tomato sauce, and wine. It discouraged sodas and baked goods and fatty spreads. And white meat was your favorite thing as opposed to red meat. Okay, Perry, you know about that. All right, so what happened? First results were really quite disappointing. The people in the Predimed study were not losing weight very fast. Over the first 12 weeks, 3 months, the group was losing only about a quarter of a kilogram. Remember, these are people who were overweight. They wanted to lose weight. They needed to lose weight for health, but the weight was coming out only very slowly. Quarter of a kilogram after 3 months, not much. And what happened with regard to whether you lived or died? All-cause mortality, meaning dying of any cause, seemed to be reduced a little bit in the oil group and the nuts group, but in no case was this statistically significant, meaning it could have just been chance. statisticians in the audience will know that a p-value below 0.05 means it's unlikely to be due to chance, but all these numbers are way above that. So how about if you die specifically of heart disease? Well, once again, it looked like there was maybe a trend, but again, it could have been just chance. None of it was statistically significant. It was discouraging. However, the researchers did notice that if you combine myocardial infarction, that's a heart attack, with stroke, with death, you put all these together and you make a composite endpoint that you're going to track. This occurred in 4.4% of the controls. It edged down a little bit to 3.8% in the olive oil group, down to 3.4% in the nut group. Okay, not super impressive, but we'll take it. Wait, one other thing. The Predimed researchers did something really smart. They got more than 7,000 people. They realized that some of those people are probably pretty close to vegetarian or vegan. What about them? How did they do? They constructed a pro-vegetarian rating scale. Those people who ate a lot of fruits and vegetables and nuts and cereals and legumes and olive oil and potatoes were high in the pro-vegetarian scale. And if they were, especially if they were low in meat, low in fish, low in dairy, low in eggs, low in the added animal fats, the pro-vegetarian scale meant you ate a lot of the plants and you generally avoided the meat products. How did they do? Well, it turned out that those people who were highest in all cause, or highest on the pro-vegetarian scale, those people who avoided the animal products the most, had the lowest risk of dying of any cause. Look, it was cut to about half. And how about cardiovascular mortality? Same story. Those people who ate more vegetables and fruits and generally avoided the meats and the dairy, they did great. So the bottom line here is that within a Mediterranean pattern, if we go a little bit further and really just get the meat out, have your pasta with a tomato sauce, have the vegetables, have the fruits, but skip the animal products, that makes the diet more powerful. Okay, our research team recently put this diet to the test. In our VegMed study, we brought in a group of people. They all wanted to lose weight. Half of them went on a Mediterranean diet, just like Predimed. The other half started a vegan diet, no animal products at all. After 16 weeks, the group switched. The Mediterranean group went vegan, the vegan group went Mediterranean, and they followed that diet for 16 weeks to see how they did. And let me show you what we found. This is body weight. In the course of this study, you see the vegan group, they lost weight pretty quickly. That graph is falling very nicely. But the Mediterranean group, oh my goodness sakes, that line is barely dropping at all. And the participants were frustrated. They didn't lose weight very fast. Then everyone stopped. For 4 weeks, they rested. Then they went to the opposite diet. And now you see that the people on the Mediterranean diet who are not losing weight very fast in the first half, now they've gone vegan and their weight loss kicks in. The people who are vegan, now they've started the Mediterranean diet as part of the research design, and what happens? The weight is coming back. Okay, I have to say, working with these participants, they were frustrated. They were angry because they liked the vegan diet. It worked for them. It made them feel better. It helped them to lose that unwanted weight. And when they switched and had to go to a Mediterranean diet, the weight came back. It was very frustrating for them. Bottom line, a vegan diet is far better than a Mediterranean diet if you want to lose weight or lower your cholesterol. In fact, let me show you the cholesterol numbers. Total cholesterol dropped 3 points in the Mediterranean diet, almost 19 points in the vegan diet. LDL cholesterol, a half a point down on the Mediterranean diet. That's really nothing, but down 15 points on the vegan diet. Now, with regard to blood pressure, there was an advantage here. Both groups had their blood pressure drop, but there was actually a slightly bigger drop in the Mediterranean group. All right. Now, we've talked a lot about the arteries and the arteries to your heart so that you don't have a heart attack. But where else do we have arteries? Not just in the heart. You've got arteries all over your body, don't you? The heart gives off the aorta, which goes upward, and then it does a U-turn, and it goes right down in front of your spine, and then eventually it splits to run down your right leg and your left leg. That aorta can have artery blockages all over your body. And the first place where the artery blockages tend to form is in the arteries that go to the lumbar spine. Researchers years ago started to notice that there was a relationship between artery disease and back pain. Sounds surprising, doesn't it? What they found is that many people with back pain, the problem is a herniating disc. Your vertebrae, your bony vertebrae stack one on top of the other, and between them are leathery cushions we call discs. And the discs can become fragile. They can break, just like a pillow whose stuffing is squishing out. A disc can break, and its soft interior can press out as well, and it can hit a nerve, and that causes pain all the way down the whole distribution of that nerve, all the way down your leg. Well, it turns out that if you have narrowed arteries, it makes it more likely that you'll have a herniated disc. And that's exactly what we see. Researchers discovered that smokers are more likely to have atherosclerosis, narrowing the arteries to their lower back, leading to back pain. But meat eaters very likely have exactly the same. By around age 18 or 20, many people have already lost one of their lumbar arteries because of atherosclerosis paving it over. That part of their lower back no longer gets adequate blood supply into the spine, and their discs become fragile. Wait a minute. Am I suggesting that the atherosclerosis in the aorta causes me to lose an artery that goes to my lower back and keeps my back healthy? That's exactly what I'm saying. Researchers have discovered that this is routine. In many, many young adults, those arteries are compromised or simply are gone as a result of an atherosclerotic process driven by eating meat, eating dairy products, eating eggs that cause the atherosclerosis to progress rapidly. The answer, plant-based diet. When you get the animal products out of your diet, the arteries that are not completely destroyed have a chance of reopening again. Okay, Viagra, very popular medication, used for erectile dysfunction. And men go to the clinic and they request some Viagra, and the doctor writes out a prescription, and the patient takes the prescription, says, "Thanks, doc," and runs out to the elevator. At which point the doctor grabs the patient and says, "Stop, you've got to come back in, we're not done yet." The doctor explains to the patient that erectile dysfunction is caused by narrow arteries too. How can that be? The arteries narrow, not just in the heart and not just in the lumbar arteries to the lower back. All the arteries in the body can narrow, including the arteries to a man's private parts. And all Viagra does is it temporarily relaxes those arteries a little bit so the blood can get through them and a man can function sexually. The male sexual anatomy is sort of a hydraulic system where you need to have good blood flow for it to work, and Viagra temporarily restores that blood flow. But for most men, if they're on a meaty diet, eating pork, eating chicken, eating other sources of saturated fat and cholesterol, they narrow the arteries to their private parts, and it leads to impotence. If they go on a healthy plant-based diet, they've got a very good shot at those arteries opening up again so they can perform sexually without the Viagra. Okay? All right, so a healthy diet: fruits, grains, legumes, and vegetables. Fruits, self-explanatory. It's a terrific snack and dessert as well as a food group. Grains are for many people a real staple, whether it's rice or barley or wheat or any of the other healthy grains. Vegetables can be starchy vegetables and root vegetables, but also can be green leafy vegetables. And all of the varieties are healthful. And finally, the legume group means beans, and including bean products like soybean products, tofu, miso, and so forth. Okay, so how do I start a healthy diet that's based on these healthy food groups? Well, I would encourage you, if you're new to this, break it into 2 steps. Step 1, take a week. And during this week, just check out the possibilities. What I mean by that is you don't have to change your diet at all. Take 7 days and just think about what you would eat if everything you ate was a plant. Well, take a piece of paper, write breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. Take a week and just think about what you would eat. And you might think, okay, there's lots of healthy breakfasts. I could have porridge or scrambled tofu or other things. Just think about it. Think about healthy lunches that you might have. The idea is not to change your diet during this first week, but to think of examples of foods you might have. So let's say I might have in Chinese cuisine, I might have vegetables. I might have rice dishes. I might have tofu dishes. All fine. The whole idea is just to avoid animal products. If you like them, write them down. In Japanese cuisine, you might have sushi. Don't have the fish sushi. I'm talking vegan. What would that mean? Cucumber roll, asparagus roll, sweet potato roll, tofu, miso soup, seaweed salad, lots of choices. Okay, but many countries offer healthy plant-based cuisine. Italian noodles, Italian pizza, all of these things can be done very easily and can be done totally vegan. Latin American cuisine, whether it's bean burritos, veggie fajitas, spinach enchiladas, all of these things can be done totally vegan. And we even have fast food options, more and more, that are leaving out the meat, leaving out the dairy products. Check them out and see what you find. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken a week and I've looked at the foods that don't have animal products in them. I've written them down, I've stocked them in my kitchen, I've tried them out, and they're good. Okay, that's step one, is identify the foods that you would like that are vegan. You can take 7 days and you've done it. Now let's do step two. Step two is to do it all vegan, all the time, for 3 weeks. We're doing a test drive, if you will. Avoid animal products completely, but do it for 3 weeks. You're going to say, well, that's easy. I can do anything for 3 weeks. And it's especially easy because you already picked out the foods that you would like. So hopefully they're in your kitchen. Go ahead and have them for the next 21 days and avoid animal products completely. Don't do this halfway. Most people go their entire lives never having the opportunity to try a truly healthful diet. Give yourself that chance. For many people, it's a life-changing experience. At the end of 3 weeks, two things will have happened. First, physically, you're healthier. Your weight is coming down. Your blood sugar is coming down. If your blood pressure is high, it's starting to come down. Your digestion is starting to get better. You're feeling more energy. But the second thing that happens is you also discover your tastes are changing. You're starting to embrace healthier foods. You're starting to enjoy them. And the foods you thought you couldn't live without, well, you sort of don't care about them anymore. If you do this right, that 3-week test drive is truly a life-changing experience. Now, many researchers have written books about their experience. This is Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell B.Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. John McDougall, but there are many, many others. I encourage you to look at them, go online and look up reversing heart disease. You'll see lots more information online. The last thing that I want to say is a big thank you. I'm grateful to you for participating in this program, but as you know, most of the people who really need this information, they're not here today. They're not participating and they've never heard of this. Why? Because they're only 12 years old. They might be in school or living with their families and they're eating foods that they've just learned to eat. But if they include pork or other kinds of meat or chicken or dairy products, they're getting animal fat, they're getting cholesterol, they're getting foods that over the long run are going to cause them to gain weight, have a higher cholesterol, and perhaps one day have a heart attack. But the reason that I want to thank you is not only are you participating in this session, but you're going to take this information with you, you're going to share it with other people. And when you do that, families hear about it, people who are at risk for heart disease hear about it, their spouses hear about it, and yes, even their 12-year-old children hear about it. And when we can influence what families eat, that not only protects people at risk today, it helps to protect their children. They can grow into adulthood on the most healthful possible diet. You have made that happen, and I thank you for doing it. This is Dr. Neal Barnard. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you.
With so many
感谢那个巴纳德博士的精彩演讲啊！我们一定要把这个信息分享出去。下面大家不要走开，是我们精彩的问答环节。我们将为大家现场连线尼尔·巴纳德博士，大家可以稍微等一下啊，那边的志愿者正在替我们连线啊。博士，如果您已经进入直播间，您就可以开始好吗？已经在聆听的观众朋友们，也请您动动手指啊，把我们的直播间分享给更多需要的人。就像刚才巴纳德博士提到的，我们要去分享啊，让他们知道，让他们能够避免这种心脏病的风险啊，让他们的孩子也能够健康的成长啊，保持这个健康的这个心血管系统。好，我们大家稍微等一下啊，我们要直接连线在美国的巴纳德博士，可能会需要一点点时间啊，感谢大家的耐心等待。好的，博士，您可以开始了。我们我们已经看到画面了。
Should we start a interactive Q&A to answer stuff?
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. OK， 我现在开始问Neal 一个问题哈，然后我来翻译，然后他来回答。第一个问题是吃素之后 HDL 下降了，怎么回事？体检总胆固醇2.85，那么按照这个数值的范围呢，属于偏低啊，这样可以吗？Neal, here is the question. My HDL fell after becoming a vegan. What is wrong? My total cholesterol is now 110. Is this too low?
Well, first of all, congratulations on changing your diet, and congratulations on having a very low, healthy cholesterol. It's not too low. It's in a very healthy range. Should I let you translate that part, and then I go to the rest?
Yes, please. Neal 刚才讲就是祝贺你，你现在呢是非常健康正常的这个胆固醇啊，祝贺你已经完成了就是完成了这个到纯素食的这种转换。
It is very common when people begin a healthy plant-based diet that their HDL will drop. And HDL is often thought of as sort of a garbage truck that carries away excess cholesterol. And since you have a lower cholesterol, you don't need so many garbage trucks to carry it away. So it's normal for HDL to fall.
就是 HD 就是对于很多人在吃素之后HDL 这个指标下降呢是一个很正常的情况因为HDL 呢是被认为是一种垃圾车它是目的呢是来运送这个胆固醇这种垃圾当你的胆固醇少了，我们就不需要这么多的垃圾车了。
Let me add one more point, and that is 10 or 20 years ago, doctors thought that a high HDL would protect us, and so companies even made medicines to increase HDL. But it turned out that they didn't help the heart at all. So we now don't really pay so much attention to HDL. Our goal here is to lower LDL, and sometimes HDL will come down a little bit too. That's not a worry.
10到20年以前啊，人们曾经认为 HDL 很重要但是后来人们发现 HDL 并不能够对心脏有太多的帮助实际上现在呢人们不再认为 HDL 那么重要我们主要是要我们的目的是要降低 LDL 那么也许 HDL 会降低一点点。That's it?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Neal. The next one. 年轻人或者是儿童、青少年心血管疾病的风险有没有多大？和生活方式有没有关系 Do children and adolescents have cardiovascular risk? Does it have anything to do with lifestyle?
Oh, what an important question. The answer is yes. Heart disease begins in childhood. There's even some evidence that it can begin before birth. Now that may be surprising, but researchers have found that in women who are not eating a healthy diet during pregnancy, when their children are born, they have the beginnings of artery disease at birth.
Neal 刚才讲就是这是一个非常重要的一个问题。实际上很大程度就是儿童现在有一些证据表明这个就是动脉硬化从儿童呢就开始了，甚至从胎儿的时候呢就已经开始了。他们发现如果在怀孕的期间这个孕妇她的饮食不正确是不好的话，那么她生下来的话这个孩子呢他就会出现一些不正常的心血管的指标。
Specifically, using ultrasound or ultrasonography, researchers have found that women with excessive weight gain during pregnancy have children with thickened arterial walls, which you can measure with ultrasound.
他们用超声波来测孕妇的就胎儿就是测胎儿结果发现如果这个孕妇她在怀孕的期间呢，她是体重超重那么这些胎儿他们的这个动脉血管呢动脉血管壁呢都会超厚。
This disease process is active during adolescence, and by around age 18 or 20, you see very often one or two arteries with moderate to advanced atherosclerosis.
这个疾病的过程呢，在青少年时候就已经在开始发展了。到了18岁左右我们就能够看到他们的动脉血管已经出现了轻度甚至已经非常的发展了的这种动脉硬化。
Where this begins, though, is not usually in the coronary arteries. We see it in the lumbar arteries, meaning the arteries that go to the lower back. And you see the beginnings of atherosclerosis there in the teens. And as I said, by the age 18 or 20, sometimes one or two of those arteries are severely diseased.
但这个它这种硬化呢，没有最开始不是从动脉硬化开始，而从腰底椎这边的这种血管开始，那么在一些年轻的人的时候，已经看到这些动脉血管呢已经出现了这种动脉硬化的这种疾病。
To stop this process, and also to stop excessive weight gain and obesity and diabetes, it's important that children be on a healthy diet. And I can tell you what that means.
如果要想停止这个过程停止这种不良的发展以及其他的一些病症那么我们就应该 从很一小就让孩子开始采取健康的饮食啊。下面呢我将给你介绍这是什么样的饮食。
And the guidelines for children are the same as for adults. 4 healthy food groups. Those are vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans or legumes, and all the other products they make, like tofu, for example, but also to take a vitamin B12 supplement. If you do those things, you can feel confident that your child is on a healthier diet.
对于儿童的营养指南和对于成人是一样的。我们应该吃蔬菜、水果、豆类，还有谷类啊。豆类呢，它就讲的是特别的讲到了豆腐。它是除此之外，还要记住每一天吃维生素 B12。如果把这几样简单的记住了的话，那么可以很确定这个孩子的饮食是非常健康的。That's it 啊。Okay, the next one.
I think that's it.
纯素饮食可以在没有营养师的指导下进行吗？儿童也可以吗？ Can we start a vegan diet without a dietitian's supervision? What about children?
Yes. The short answer is you do not need to have a dietitian's supervision to start the diet. I wouldn't wait. You can start it right away. And as long as you're following those 2 guidelines I mentioned, having the 4 healthy food groups and vitamin B12, you have confidence that your overall nutrition is met. Dietitians can be helpful, though, for people who are needing some trouble planning out a menu to make the whole family happy. They can do those things and sometimes have more specialized advice.
Neal 说，一般情况下，我们不需要一个营养师的指导，就可以进行低脂纯素的饮食。只要我们根据刚才 Neal 说的那几个最基本的框架啊，包括4种食物啊，蔬果、豆谷啊，包括 B12的补充啊，在某些特别的情况下，那个就是营养师也可以帮助，能够使我们的营养和我们的餐食呢更加丰富。Neal。Next one 啊，抑郁症或者焦虑症会不会引发心脏病和脑卒中 ？Could depression and anxiety trigger heart disease and stroke?
What an important question in a world where depression and anxiety are more common than before, and where we are under a great deal of stress. Depression and anxiety can affect us in 2 broad ways. The first is they unleash hormonal changes in the body that can accelerate certain disease processes. Let me stop at that point.
Neal 说这也是一个非常重要的问题啊，因为当今社会抑郁症和焦虑症呢非常的多啊。那么抑郁症和焦虑症啊，对于心脏病和脑卒中呢，在2方面有影响啊。第一方面呢。就是抑郁症和焦虑症啊，它们是影响我们身体的激素系统。
However, I believe that even when people are under stress, if they're following a very healthy diet, they manage that stress and are at less risk of heart disease, even when the stress continues.
但是呢，即使他在很高的压力的情况下，如果他的饮食是一个非常健康的饮食的话，他更容易来控制他的压力啊。
The other way that depression and anxiety can contribute to heart disease is people often cope with anxiety by eating unhealthy food. In other words, when we don't feel psychologically well, we often find ourselves eating in a way that's not very healthy either. And yet it turns out that when people follow a healthy plant-based diet, it sometimes reduces anxiety and reduces depression.
例如说第2个方面呢，就是当人们开始有抑郁还有焦虑的时候呢，人们经常会主动的去吃一些不健康的食物啊，这使问题变得更糟啊。所以说健康的饮食啊，可以减少抑郁还有焦虑，从而进一步呢使我们的饮食更加健康。
It appears that we believe that the most effective approach for depression and anxiety would be to combine whatever approach your doctor offers, whether it's medication or whatever, but combine that with both a healthy plant-based diet and regular exercise, because the exercise and diet can work together.
Neal 说最好的办法呢，是我们第一，我们要就是听医生说的啊，根据医生的建议啊。第二呢，我们要采取健康的饮食啊。第三个呢，要有一个比较常规的一个叫运动的一个，就是要坚持运动。好 ，next one 啊 ，OK， 限制蛋白质的摄入。能不能降低心脏病的风险啊？使我们更长寿 ？Can limiting protein intake lower heart disease risk and promote longevity?
I don't know that specifically lowering protein itself is going to help, but keep in mind if a person is reducing meat, they're getting a little bit less protein perhaps, but they're also getting a lot less cholesterol and animal fat, and that's what matters the most. The reason I make that distinction is that protein is a nutrient in many foods. The problem is that when our protein comes from animal products, we get the fat and cholesterol with it. If our protein comes from plant products, you don't get any animal fat and you don't get the cholesterol.
Neal 说，蛋白质本身啊，并不一定会影响我们的心脏病的风险或者长寿。但是如果我们吃动物性的食物里面的蛋白质，因为动物性的食物含有胆固醇和饱和脂肪，这些食物使我们变得更加有病啊，所以说会影响心脏病和长寿的风险。这个问题的根源呢，就在于我们蛋白质呢是一个普世的一个名词，它又可以存在于动物性食物，也可以存在于植物性的食物。当我们吃了动物性的食物，那么我们动物性食物里面的其他成分使得我们更加疾病啊，但是如果我们吃了植物性的食物，植物性的食物的一些营养成分使我们更加健康。
Thank you.
好 ，next one， 低压高如何调理 ？How should we treat high diastolic pressure through lifestyle changes?
Both a diastolic blood pressure and a systolic blood pressure can be changed by lifestyle changes. And for any non-physicians who are watching the program, let me just describe them. Diastolic blood pressure is the pressure in your arteries when the heart is relaxed. Systolic blood pressure is when the heart is contracting during a beat. So it goes up to 120, down to 80, 120, down to diastolic.
Neal 说呢，就是高压和低压都可以通过生活方式的改变来调整啊。那对于那个 Neal 呢解释了一下怎么回事啊？低压呢是我们的心，而高压呢是在我们的心脏呢在收缩时候的那个血管的压力。
The first step that many people take, for many people that doesn't go far enough, I will describe.
第一步呢，我们是降低我们饮食的钠，也就是盐啊。如果那么但是呢，这一步呢，有经常的对很多的人呢，不足以降低他们的血压。那下一个啊，他讲。
When people get away from animal products and they avoid animal fat, their blood becomes less thick, less viscous. And when your blood is less thick, it can flow more easily, and so blood pressure comes down.
当我们吃了动物性的脂肪啊，还有动物性的食物的话啊，动物制品的话，那么我们的血液呢会变得粘稠，而这个粘稠度啊，使这个血流呢放缓，最终呢使得我们的血压增加。
Finally, I would encourage you to plan your meals, paying special attention to vegetables and fruits. They are rich in potassium, which is the opposite of sodium. it brings down blood pressure even more. So limit sodium, get away from animal products, favor vegetables and fruits.
最后一点 ，Neal 呢就提醒我们要注意，要多摄入蔬菜和水果因为这些食物含有更多的钾钾的作用和钠正好相反可以帮助我们降低血压所以说 Neal 总结了一下3点：第一降低钠第二去掉动物性的食物；第三提高钾的摄入。好 ，the next one。宠物的猫狗得了心脏病，吃素食有没有用？Can a vegan diet help companion animals with their heart disease?
First of all, if you have a companion animal with heart disease, I'm sorry to hear that has happened. But yes, dogs go vegan pretty easily. They do well. And there are also sometimes supplements that can be given to dogs to make sure their nutrition is complete.
Neal 说，首先，如果您的就是这种宠物呢，如果得了心脏病的话他呢就觉得就是他也很就是同理的悲伤吧，就是这样。那个他说呢，就对于狗那么他们经常就是抱歉，刚才这个Hana 来了。OK， 那么对于狗的话刚才就是 Hana 来了，使我就是一下走神了那么对于狗的话呢，就是一般来讲它是可以吃素的但是现在呢也有一些呢专门给狗吃素的一些补品就是一些补剂使得它们的吃素呢更可以就是营养更加全面。Neal。OK， next one。
Well, before we go on, Jia, the person mentioned companion animals, but didn't say if it was a cat or dog or other type. So although I mentioned for dogs, it can work. With cats need a particular amino acid called taurine, and without it, they don't do well. And so cats can follow a plant-based diet if their diet is carefully supplemented. And sometimes cats will just hold their breath until you give them the meat that they want. So they're sometimes a little more reluctant to become vegan. But in any case, if you're going to try this, they do need to be supplemented.
Neal 说，对于狗来讲，吃素呢比较容易，但是对于猫来讲呢，它们的代谢呢，它需要一种就是氨基酸叫做牛磺酸这种牛磺酸呢需要额外的给它补充那么另外呢，猫呢它可能还不一定愿意吃素，所以说有时候呢你需要跟它去交流沟通，或者是跟它说好就是说就这意思。OK，Thank you, Neal. Next one 如何从日常饮食中预防心脑血管疾病？对于口味重又难以改变的家人应该怎么做 ？How can we prevent cardiovascular diseases through daily diet, especially for those who enjoy salty and spicy foods?
The salt and the spice are not problems in and of themselves. Salt becomes a problem when it's used in excess. Above about 2 grams a day or 2.3 grams a day, it's too much. But the problem with salt, the only problem with salt and spices really for most people is what the salt and spices are going on. If they're going on some broccoli or some asparagus or some pea pod tips, no problem. But when they go on pork chops and chicken breast and fish, then what we're doing is we are salting cholesterol and saturated fat, and that is what ends up damaging the arteries.
Neal 说这个就是如果爱吃口重比如说特别盐的、特别咸的东西呢，一般就只要不超过一些基本的那个要求的量，比如说就是6克盐呢，应该是没有问题。但是最重要的还不是在这一点最重要的是这个盐你是跟什么吃？你要是跟蔬菜吃的话没有问题但是你要如果是跟肉类的吃的话，那么你将吃进去的是胆固醇还有饱和脂肪，这些是会有问题的。
I would add just one quick thing. Some people will switch from meat to tofu, for example. And tofu has no cholesterol, it has no animal fat in it, and because it's made from soybeans, it has a very slight cholesterol lowering effect of its own, according to the best research we have. And you can spice it up as much as you want.
Neal 刚才又加了一条，他说如果我们是用大豆制品大豆来替代肉类的话，因为大豆呢它的一些成分有一个降低胆固醇的一个作用，所以说你如果和大豆的制品一起吃你的比较重口味的盐的话，对你的健康没有什么影响。Thank you, Neal. Okay, next one. 如何看待生酮饮食部分或者全部能够逆转这种慢病的一些案例？有什么理论依据？How do you view the fact that ketogenic diet could partially or even completely reverse chronic diseases in some cases? Is there any theoretical base for this type of diet?
First of all, the evidence base that there's really not particularly good evidence that a ketogenic diet reverses much of anything. What we do see is that when people follow a so-called ketogenic diet and they're avoiding sugar and starches to try to remove, to try to lower their blood sugar, sometimes their blood sugars will fall, and so diabetes temporarily looks better. But over the long run, cholesterol levels tend to rise in many people following diets like this. And that's because there are meat and dairy fats left in the diet. And so those tend to bring things in the wrong direction. But the longer term studies haven't been done. And what we suspect will happen is that over the long run, people sometimes lose weight on a ketogenic diet, but usually bring it back. And that these foods are the kinds of foods that would encourage heart disease, certain forms of cancer like colon cancer, and possibly Alzheimer's disease. So those are the concerns that we have.
Neal 讲关于生酮饮食呢，目前真的没有太多的证据科学证据能够证明它能够逆转任何一种疾病那有时候呢，我们可能会看到对于糖尿病的患者，你如果采取不吃碳水化合物，它有可能血糖呢得到了控制但是呢就是这是短期的症状而已那么对于长期的情况来讲那这些生酮饮食最终有可能带来的是心脏的这种疾病因为它里面含有胆固醇，还有饱和脂肪，而且呢生酮饮食对，而且长期来讲呢，就是我们的体重最开始下降，后来可能又会回去所以总的来讲生酮饮食它所推荐这些食物所含的胆固醇、饱和脂肪等等都是对我们的健康是没有好处的因此我们不推荐生酮饮食。Okay, Neal, we have time for one more question. All right, so let me see. Here is. Okay, 哪些正确的活动可以延缓斑块的发展 ？What proper exercise could slow down the development of arterial plaques?
It's very important to remember that exercise does not operate in the same way as nutrition. So with any kind of exercise you do, it will not stop artery disease unless the diet is healthy.
OK, 那个 Neal 说呢，就是我们一定要注意区分营养和运动之间的差别那么对于运动来讲任何一种运动你如果不结合饮食上的改变，正确的营养的话，那么我们不可能延缓斑块的发展。
When Dr. Dean Ornish did his study on reversing heart disease, he used diet changes were really the core of the program, but he added exercise to a healthy diet, not instead of it. And the exercise program that he used was a half-hour brisk walk every day.
就是奥尼士医师啊，他当时做的是逆转心脏病这个题目啊。当他给病人逆转心脏病的时候呢，他是用运动加到饮食的上面，也就是在饮食基础上加上运动，而不是用运动来替代饮食啊。那么当时呢，他所给建议的这种运动方式呢，就是每一天大约半个小时的比较快的快步走这种情况。
Very good.
All right. I think the time is up. Thank you so much, Neal, for your gracing our event. I believe our audience have learned so much from you, and we look forward to have you again in future conferences.
Well, I want to thank you, Jia, and to thank all the participants for being part of this important conference. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Hana will play your. OK， 我们现在调回去了啊，现在应该调回去了啊。Hana will play。
感谢尼尔巴纳德博士的精彩的演讲，以及我们的徐佳博士和这个尼尔巴纳德博士的精彩互动啊，也给大家带来了一些这个新的一个知识点啊。下一位的演讲嘉宾呢，是 Hana Kahleova 医学博士。Hana 博士呢，他是医学博士、哲学博士、工商管理硕士，是 Institute for Clinical and Experimental Medicine 是一个研究院，是临床医学研究院的，他是博士后的研究员，是美国责任医师协会的临床研究总监。是美国糖尿病协会会员，欧洲糖尿病研究协会营养与糖尿病研究组的董事会成员，糖尿病内科咨询医师。今天呢，Kahleova 博士给我们带来的演讲题目是哪种饮食最适合心血管代谢健康？我们有请 Kahleova 博士。
With so many diets out there, you may be wondering which diet works best for cardiometabolic health. And that's exactly the topic of our lecture. My name is Hana Kahleova. I'm Director of Clinical Research at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And let me walk you through which diet works best for cardiometabolic health. The outline of the lecture is we'll be looking at the benefits of fiber for cardiometabolic health, then review different plant-based eating patterns, and also the pathophysiologic mechanisms behind. Okay, more than 45% of cardiometabolic deaths in the United States could be prevented if people ate less processed meats, less sodium, less red meats, and drank less sugar-sweetened beverages, and if they ate more whole grains, fruits and vegetables, and nuts and seeds. The Adventist Health Study 2 has demonstrated a linear relationship between the animal product consumption and the risk of developing obesity and also type 2 diabetes. Vegans are the leanest people compared to other groups, and they also have the lowest chance of getting diabetes. Why is it? First of all, it comes down to energy density. We know that plant foods tend to have low energy density, so they can fill us up without, and we can get satiated without the extra energy, in contrast to meat, other animal products, and highly processed oils. It comes down to fiber. Fiber is the magic component of the plant-based nutrition that works in different components of our gastrointestinal system and promotes satiety is important for energy balance and weight regulation. It also regulates the gut microbiome composition, both its richness and diversity, and also its composition. A meta-analysis from 185 studies with 135 million person years showed that fiber consumption reduces all-cause mortality by 15%. That means fiber intake can reduce the risk of dying from any cause by 15%. And we can see that the most benefits can be seen somewhere around 15 to 20 grams per day, but the line keeps declining, even though more gradually. And so you can get benefits even when you're eating 35 grams per day. But the steepest benefits are obtained when you, if you're not consuming any fiber, if you actually start eating some fiber, somewhere between 15 and 20 grams per day. The benefits of fiber are also in preventing the development of type 2 diabetes. Fiber consumption can decrease the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 16%, and can also improve all the cardiometabolic outcomes, such as body weight, plasma lipids, systolic blood pressure, and fasting plasma glucose. Now, fiber is even more important in people with diabetes. It can decrease the all-cause mortality by 45%, and we can see the most benefits between 20 and 26 grams of fiber per day, but we can see that the line is still declining much more rapidly than in general population. So people with diabetes, the more fiber they eat, the more benefits they get. And also fiber intake reduces cardiovascular mortality by 39%. So compared to 15% in general population, 45% in diabetes, and a reduction in cardiovascular mortality by 39% is much more remarkable in people with diabetes. So people with diabetes need to be much more careful about their fiber intake. Fiber also improves the cardiometabolic outcomes in type 2 diabetes, such as A1C, fasting plasma glucose, blood lipids, body weight, waist circumference, C-reactive protein as a marker of inflammation, and also insulin resistance. Now, is there any fiber in animal products? Of course not. There's no fiber whatsoever. That means we are completely dependent on plant foods for our fiber intake. Now, how many plant-based eating patterns emphasize the consumption of fiber? First of all, it's the Mediterranean diet, which is very popular. The Mediterranean diet emphasizes the consumption of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, but also adds some low-fat dairy, includes white meat, and includes olive oil, 4 tablespoons of olive oil in the Predimed study, and 3 servings of nuts per week. The DASH diet, or the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, is a plant-based diet eating pattern that emphasizes the consumption of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, but still includes some low-fat dairy and white meat, especially fish, but is much more low-fat compared to the Mediterranean diet. The same for the Nordic diet, which is rich in berries and whole rye bread and leafy green vegetables, but also includes fish and low-fat dairy. And then there's vegetarian diets, excluding all meat, and vegan diets, excluding all animal products. Now, how do you choose between these diets, right? Well, the Mediterranean diet has been shown to improve all the cardiometabolic outcomes. The cardiovascular mortality reduction was reduced by 21% using a Mediterranean diet. Coronary heart disease incidence was reduced by 27%. Coronary heart disease mortality was reduced by 27% on a Mediterranean diet. And also the risk of getting stroke incidence was reduced by 20%, stroke mortality by 13%, and myocardial infarction incidence by 27%. The Mediterranean diet also improves all the cardiometabolic outcomes, such as fasting plasma glucose, systolic and diastolic blood pressure, triglycerides, waist circumference, and body weight. What about the DASH diet? The DASH diet, that's much lower in fat compared to the Mediterranean diet. And aside from emphasizing fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, it also includes low dairy and some nuts and seeds and lean meats. There have been some studies that have also demonstrated some benefits for the DASH diet. A reduction of cardiovascular disease risk by 20%, a reduction of risk in coronary heart disease by 21%, and the reduction of stroke risk by 19%. And again, a meta-analysis has shown an improvement in cardiometabolic outcomes, such as reduction in blood pressure, blood lipids, improvements in glycemic control, and body weight reduction. The Nordic diet that emphasizes green leafy vegetables, fruits, especially berries, and includes fish and low-fat dairy, has been shown to improve blood pressure and blood lipids. There haven't been as many studies as compared with the other dietary patterns. And we're coming to vegetarian and vegan diets. And a meta-analysis from 7 cohort studies, including almost 200,000 people, has demonstrated a reduction in coronary heart disease mortality by 22% and a reduction in coronary heart disease incidence by 28%. And also improvements in cardiometabolic outcomes, such as blood pressure and improvements in blood lipids and glycemic control and weight reduction. But now you may be thinking, wow, like all these diets have so many benefits. How do they compare to each other? Well, when you just pull all the meta-analyses together, you may not see many differences. Like for body weight, it seems like all of these diets may have beneficial outcomes. The same for LDL cholesterol and for glycemic control. But that's exactly why we decided to do a head-to-head trial and compare a Mediterranean and a vegan diet head-to-head. We did this in a randomized crossover trial. The participants half of the participants started with a Mediterranean diet for 16 weeks, and the other half with a low-fat vegan diet for 16 weeks. And when the 16 weeks were up, then they switched. And the Mediterranean group switched over to a low-fat vegan diet, and the low-fat vegan diet group to the Mediterranean diet. Now, which diet do you think will work better for weight loss and cardiometabolic health? You can put your answers in the chat box. Is it A, the Mediterranean diet, or B, the low-fat vegan diet, or C, both will be about equally beneficial? Who knows? You will need to wait for the answer a bit. Let me start with the experience of our study participant, Kimberly. Kimberly had some extra weight when she joined our study. Her body mass index was 35.9, her total cholesterol 233, and she also had elevated blood sugar. Her blood sugar was 124. Now on the vegan diet, Kimberly lost 28 pounds, but on the Mediterranean diet, she regained 9 pounds. The same trends for total cholesterol, a reduction by 17 milligrams per deciliter on a vegan diet, but then an increase by 9 milligrams per deciliter on the Mediterranean diet. And the same for fasting blood sugar. A nice reduction on the vegan diet, but an increase on the Mediterranean. What about the whole group? Well, guess what? People were losing 6 kilograms or 13 pounds on the vegan diet compared to the Mediterranean diet. In fact, for the group as a whole, body weight didn't change significantly on the Mediterranean diet, but there was a clear reduction in body weight on the vegan diet. These are all the participants. The green bars are the changes on the vegan diet. We can see that people were losing weight. The vast majority of our study participants were losing weight on the vegan diet. But with the Mediterranean diet, it's kind of all over the place. Some people were gaining weight, some people were losing weight, and the Mediterranean diet was working well for them. But we can see that even for these people, the vegan diet was working better. There were only a couple who were losing weight nicely on the Mediterranean diet compared to the vegan diet. Fat mass was reduced on the vegan diet by 7.7 pounds. So about 2/3 of the weight loss may be explained by the fat loss. And also visceral fat was reduced on the vegan diet. Insulin sensitivity was improved on the vegan diet. LDL cholesterol was reduced, and also systolic blood pressure was reduced on both diets, but more on the Mediterranean one. The same for diastolic blood pressure. So were you keeping track? How many of the cardiometabolic outcomes were improved on the vegan diet, and how many on the Mediterranean diet? Let's start with the Mediterranean diet. How many outcomes were improved on the Mediterranean diet? The answer is only blood pressure, only systolic and diastolic blood pressure, which were improved on both diets, but more on the Mediterranean one. And how many outcomes were improved on the vegan diet? All of them. Okay, so which diet worked better for cardiometabolic health? It was the vegan diet. So vegan diet worked well for weight regulation, and also for ectopic fat. What is ectopic fat? We were looking at visceral fat around the inner organs, which is the metabolically most dangerous fat. But what about other locations of the ectopic fat? Our adipose tissue has only a certain capacity to store fat. Once we exceed this capacity, the fat starts overflowing to the inner organs, like the liver and the muscle, the pancreas, and it compromises the insulin production. It causes insulin resistance in these tissues. And to give you an analogy, it's like taking a bubble bath, and you're just enjoying the bubble bath. You're enjoying how much water there is in your bathtub, until you realize that all the water is overflowing not only to your bathroom floor, but also to your living room. And in your living room, unfortunately, the furniture is not really built, for so much water. So your furniture may be damaged. All the hardwood floors may suffer from some damage. And the same happens in our organs. This is normal liver. This is fatty liver under the microscope. We can see all the fatty droplets, which cause insulin resistance and also compromise the mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. So if they're not able to function properly, then insulin resistance and diabetes may develop. And hyperglycemia also compromises the ability for beta oxidation of the fatty acids and compromises the function of the mitochondria. The high-fat diet has been shown to really impair the function of mitochondria. The mitochondria are lesser in count, are smaller and dysfunctional in people who are overweight and have diabetes compared to healthy, lean people. Now, I have a question for you. Can a vegan diet reduce liver fat? To answer that question, we performed a 16-week study where we compared a low-fat vegan to a control diet, a standard American diet. And we were sending 44 overweight people to Yale University for the measurements of magnetic resonance spectroscopy of the liver and of the muscle. And now it's time for you to guess, how much did the vegan diet reduce liver fat on average? A, by 14%, B, by 24%, and C, by 34%. You can put your answer in the chat box. What's your guess? 14, 24, or 34%? Ta-da! It was a 34% reduction, which is amazing. There's no causal treatment for fatty liver at this point. So diet is the #1 recommendation for fatty liver. And a vegan diet was able to reduce liver fat by 34% in 16 weeks, which is remarkable. So we know that a vegan diet works for weight regulation and ectopic fat. What about dietary acid load? Dietary acid load, what is it? Well, you may have heard that we're eating fruits and vegetables so that because these are not acidic foods, these are alkaline foods. So is there any truth to it? Can these foods actually improve our metabolic health and our cardiovascular health? It has been shown that the more acids we consume in our diet, the more we are at risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Also, every decrease in dietary acid load by 10 units is associated with an increase by 5% in physical performance. So how can you even calculate the dietary acid load? There's a formula which is based on protein and phosphorus. So the higher your protein and your phosphorus intake, the higher your dietary acid load. But you subtract potassium and magnesium and calcium. So the more potassium and magnesium and calcium you have in your diet, the lower, this will lower your dietary acid load. And what's the dietary acid load in different foods? Let's start with animal foods. Beef, chicken, salami, cheddar cheese. And the highest one is Parmesan, 34.2 milliequivalents per 3 ounces or 100 grams of food. What about Plant foods, much lower. Rye bread, only 4. We were around 8 or 9 being the lowest values. Now we're around 4. Even sugar is completely neutral, more on the negative side, helping our body to get alkaline. Potatoes, alkalinizing effect. And the most alkalinizing food is spinach or green leafy vegetables, -14. The minus sign means that these foods have alkalinizing properties, help us reduce the dietary acid load and get rid of all the extra acids. To give you a comparison, a ham and cheese sandwich would have almost 42 milliequivalents, but the same amount of baked potatoes with spinach would be in the negative, -23 milliequivalents. So the difference would be almost 65 milliequivalents. Going back to the previous study on physical performance, this would boost your physical performance by 30% only based on the meal you would be eating. And what about dietary acid load and weight loss? We were looking at the power of a low-fat vegan diet versus a control diet for 16 weeks in 244 overweight adults to lose weight based on the dietary acid load. And people on the vegan diet were losing about 14 pounds in 16 weeks. And now, how much do you think the dietary acid load decreased on average on the vegan diet? A, by 14 milliequivalents per day, B, by 24 milliequivalents per day, and C, by 34 milliequivalents per day. What do you think? Put your answer in the chat box. The answer is 24 milliequivalents per day. Now, what does it mean? Let's say every 10 units decrease in dietary acid load were also associated with how much weight loss? A, about 0.75 kilograms or 1.7 pounds. B, 7.5 kilograms or 16.5 pounds. And C, 17.5 kilograms or 38.6 pounds. What do you think? Put your answer in the chat box. The answer is every 10 units reduction in dietary acid load were associated with about 0.75 kilograms of weight loss or 1.7 pounds of weight loss. Of course, the vegan diet has other beneficial components that help with weight loss, not only the dietary acid load, but also the plant protein itself, the fiber content, the low saturated fat concentrations, and no cholesterol intake, and so on. And after adjustment for energy intake, the 10 units reduction in dietary acid load were associated with about 1.5 pounds of weight loss. So a vegan diet is just amazing for the reduction in dietary acid load, for boosting your performance and for your cardiometabolic health and weight loss. Now let's look at our metabolism. Is a plant-based diet able to increase our metabolism? Turning up the heat has been suggested as one of the strategies how to combat obesity and diabetes. And it has been shown that when we eat a meal, this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, our energy expenditure goes up. And that's called the thermic effect of food. You know that when you're cold and you eat something, you warm up because of the thermic effect of food, because there's a certain amount of energy released in the form of heat when you eat a meal. Now, are certain foods more thermogenic than others? And the answer is absolutely. One study compared a processed sandwich with white bread with a whole wheat sandwich. And the whole wheat sandwich had a higher thermic effect of food compared to the white bread sandwich. Dr. Barnard was the first one to show that a vegan diet actually increased the after meal calorie burn by 16%. When people switch over to a plant-based diet, their metabolism is speeded up. And we did a study on a vegan diet for 16 weeks. We compared a low-fat vegan diet with a standard American diet, and we were performing some standard meal tests, and we're measuring people's metabolism. This is a machine that's called an indirect calorimetry, and it works. It looks like a spaceship. You come into our lab and we place this clear hood over your head and you just breathe normally. And based on the carbon dioxide output, we're able to calculate how many calories you're burning. This is a sample report. You can see that there are some fluctuations, but we can calculate the average over the 15-minute period, and then you get a report whether how much your resting metabolic rate is, and whether you were burning carbohydrates or more fat. Now, insulin resistance was decreased on the vegan diet. Now, the thermic effect of food didn't change significantly in the control group, but in the vegan group, it increased by 14%. So a vegan diet really worked well for metabolism. When you're burning 14% more calories after each meal, that means that you can potentially eat 14% more calories without gaining weight. Or if you are struggling from being overweight, that means that with the same amount of energy you will be losing weight. So the vegan diet really works well for weight regulation, ectopic fat, dietary acid load, and metabolism. And when we compared the vegan diet to the Mediterranean diet, we showed that the vegan diet worked much better than the Mediterranean diet for cardiometabolic health. So I'd like to encourage all of you to give a vegan diet a try. And thank you so much for your attention. And I'm ready to take your questions.
好，现在马上就要进行的是和那个克雷欧尔博士的问答环节，请大家不要走开啊，我们稍等一下啊，志愿者帮大家连麦。
Chinese audience around the world will have more time to listen to your live saving information. Let me translate them for you.
Question. Many people are concerned about protein, right? How do I get my protein on a vegan? The only few nutrients that you need to pay close attention to is vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is not made by plants nor by animals. It's made by bacteria. And in the past, people used to drink water from a creek where the bacteria produced vitamin B12. So they were drinking this water enriched with vitamin B12. They were also eating their vegetables from the garden. And when they washed their vegetables, some dirt still remained on the vegetables. So they were getting some soil bacteria together with the vitamin B12. But we don't do these anymore. Unfortunately, we use so much sanitation for our water, for our vegetables, and all our food that we just need to be careful about getting enough vitamin B12. So if you are...
Could you just pause here so that I can translate?
Oh, sorry. Absolutely.
Yeah, I need to translate back into
Absolutely.
Chinese. OK， 刚才呢那个Kahleova 那个博士呢，他是这么说啊。首先呢，就是这是一个非常好的问题啊。他说呢，很多人担心蛋白质的不足，蛋白质啊，吃素会缺乏蛋白质。他说实际上呢，你只要是吃正常的这种我们推荐这种饮食的话，那么你吃饱了，那你的蛋白质就够了啊，所以是很难达到蛋白质的不足。那么我们需要就是注意的呢，就是维生素 B12。啊，他说维生素 B12呢，以前呢，首先它不是动物合成的，也不是植物合成的，它是由细菌合成的。啊，以前呢，我们那个喝水都是从溪水喝水，所以那里面呢都有一些细菌，所以会有维生素 B12。而且呢，我们以前吃的那些食物，我们都是就是像自然农耕嘛，我们直接从地里头拉出来的这个，比如说胡萝卜呀什么的，上面都有一些土，我们洗完之后呢，上面还残存一些维生素 B12。啊，这些呢就够了。Okay, go ahead, continue, please.
So in order to be safe, it's just easier to take a supplement, 100 micrograms a day. We just need a tiny little bit, but make sure you get the tiny little bit.
然后他说现在呢，所以正是因为这样，我们现在需要补充维生素 B12。每天呢，他在美国他说有100个微克的那种 B12 的剂量啊，那每天就吃1片啊，每天就那一点点就够了。
And the second vitamin I'd like to emphasize is vitamin D, which is recommended for general population. If you are working in the office most of the time and not getting enough sunshine, then you need to supplement vitamin D, especially over the winter months. But that's a recommendation for general population, not only on a vegan diet, but I like to emphasize it if you're on any diet.
就是他说第二个我们需要注意的就是维生素 D，维生素 D 这个不光光是对吃素的人啊，对所有的人都是这样啊。他说因为现代人就是如果你没有太多机会啊，在室外晒太阳的话啊，那么我们可能就是自己不能够合成足够的维生素 D， 我们就需要就是吃一些补剂。That's it. Okay. Next question. OK， 吃素6年了，现在体检缺钙啊，通过什么途径可以补钙 ？I have been a vegan for 6 years, and a recent checkup shows that I have calcium deficiency. How can I improve my calcium status?
Yeah, what an excellent question. An easy thing to remember when we're talking about calcium is greens and beans. So make sure you consume a lot of green leafy vegetables and add legumes like beans and lentils and tofu, soybeans. So greens and beans.
他说这个问题非常好啊。那么当我们谈到钙的话，我们就要记住，我们要多吃2种食物，一个呢就是各种豆类，还有一种呢就是绿色的蔬菜。啊，就是各种绿颜色的蔬菜，而豆类呢，各种豆腐包括豆制品啊，都是可以的。Okay, the next question. 女性的更年期会不会增加心脑血管疾病和高血压的风险 ？Is there a higher cardiovascular and hypertension risk for menopausal women?
Compared to pre-menopausal women, yes. But not necessarily for you personally. The increased risk in postmenopausal women is due to the hormonal changes. Estrogens are protective during the reproductive period of life, while when they're weaning out, we kind of lose their benefit. So it's more important in postmenopausal women to stick to a healthy diet to prevent the increase of cardiovascular disease. We know that age itself increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, both in men and women, but we can taper it off. We can ameliorate the increase by a healthy diet and healthy lifestyle, exercise, getting enough sleep, stress management, and so on.
他讲呢，就是比起那个在绝经以前啊，那在绝经的妇女呢，确实呢有可能心血管疾病和这样的风险会增加，但是呢，这个不是这个主要是因为在绝经以前呢，我们有那个雌激素啊，雌激素呢对我们的很多的生理功能呢有一些保护作用，然后这时候绝经之后啊，那么雌激素减少啊，所以这个保护作用呢就减少了啊，那么实际上对于不管是男士还是女士啊，随着那个年龄的增加，年龄实际呢是一个更重要的一个也是一个重要的一个风险因素啊，就是心血管疾病。所以说呢，当我们年龄呢就是增加的话，我们应该更加注重生活方式，包括我们的饮食健康的饮食我们运动、睡眠，还有那个压力的这个管理。Okay, you have more to this question?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. The next one. Okay, 低脂纯素会有可能使高密度脂蛋白增高吗？而且超过正常值。Can a low-fat vegan diet raise HDL cholesterol level beyond normal range?
What a great question. It's important to realize that it's the total and LDL cholesterol that are the most important for cardiovascular risk. So a vegan diet will bring down the total and LDL cholesterol. And with HDL, it's a little bit more tricky. The role of HDL cholesterol is to bring the particles back to your liver so that they can be metabolized there. But if there's, less garbage to be taken to the liver, there's also less need for HDL cholesterol, which means that if your total cholesterol decreases, your LDL cholesterol decreases, the HDL cholesterol may also decrease. But the most important thing is that your LDL cholesterol drops more than the HDL cholesterol, and that's still a marker of improved cardiovascular risk.
Thank you. Hana 呢，他讲就是这里面的重要的呢是总胆固醇和低密度脂蛋白胆固醇，而那个高密度脂蛋白胆固醇，也就是 HDL 啊，这个呢并不是就是没有就是这个需要那个更多的去解释，因为这个 HDL 呢，它相当于把这个那个胆固醇从全身的运回到肝脏啊。那么如果呢你的身体里面没有这么多胆固醇的话，那么 HDL 呢，那么也就不需要这么多了。所以这里面最关键的呢是我们在降胆固醇的时候 ，LDL 和 HDL 都会同时降。最好呢，我们需要看到的是 LDL 比 HDL 降得多啊，那么这样呢就表示我们的心血管的风险呢在降低。Okay, the next question. 心脏病和炎症水平有没有关系啊 ？Is heart disease related to inflammation?
What a great question. Absolutely. There's subclinical inflammation as an underlying mechanism of atherosclerosis. There's inflammatory immune cells that produce inflammatory cytokines, during the process of atherosclerosis. The good question is how to prevent it and how to treat it. I'll let you translate it.
的关系非常明确，都是在形成动脉硬化的过程中，这个炎起到了非常重要的作用。Go ahead.
How is the inflammation attracts the monocytes, the immune cells that start consuming the cholesterol and become foam cells? That's really fatty cells stuffed with cholesterol, trying to get rid of the toxin, of the toxic cholesterol that's built up in the body.
他说呢，这个炎症呢是最开始呢就是胆固醇的沉积在我们的血管的内壁上，沉积内壁上之后呢，我们的那个就是单核细胞呢会来吞噬掉这些胆固醇，为了保护我们，然后于是呢这些细胞最后呢就变成了这个叫泡沫细胞，而这个泡沫细胞呢，它呢就是里面有了很多的胆固醇就是吞噬了很多的胆固醇的结果。
And the monocytes, which turn it into macrophages and consume all that cholesterol, eventually die within the arteries. It becomes their grave. And if that happens, they're not able to serve us in any other capacity. Let's say there's cancer cells also that need the immune system function. But our immune cells are so busy consuming all that cholesterol that they're not able to get rid of the cancer cells.
然后他说呢，这些那个单核细胞吃了很多胆固醇，最终呢，它就会在我们的那个血管壁呢就是死亡，那因为我们血管壁呢一直在出现这种因为单核细胞引起的这些炎症反应，它使得这样的话我们不能够去帮助我们清除癌细胞。
No inflammation in your arteries and your immune cells are ready. Area, just don't consume cholesterol at
的去清除这些
question. In还是在给一个人供应营养，这个。 Please go for they'll go on walks or hiking. So that's number 3, pay attention to the composition of your diet.
说第一呢，我们要正常的去那个运动啊，比如说去做，但是不需要特做 强烈的运动啊，就是这种很自然的那种普通的运动就可以了。然后第二呢，就是我们要喝足够的水啊。第三个呢，要注意我们饮食的结构。
Consuming a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables will ensure a high potassium versus natrium intake, and that will decrease your risk of developing hypertension.
多吃蔬菜水果啊，那么它含有大量的钾，而少量的钠啊，比较少的钠啊，这样的话可以降低我们得妊娠高血压的风险。
Green leafy vegetables contain a lot of arginine that will convert to nitric oxide, which makes vasodilation and also decreases your risk of high blood pressure.
深绿色蔬菜呢，含有很多的一些那个精氨酸，这些精氨酸会被转化为一氧化氮，一氧化氮呢可以帮助扩张血管啊，从而呢降低我们的血压。Last question, one last question. 乳腺癌患者可以吃大豆和亚麻籽吗？ Can breast cancer patients eat soy foods or flax seeds?
Oh, what a great question. There have been some concerns that are not real well grounded. In fact, there's a meta-analysis looking at breast cancer survivors that looked at soy food consumption, and the higher soy food consumption, the better these women were doing.
他说呢，一直呢有这样的那个担心，但是呢，他并没有很足够的证据啊。有这么一项非荟萃的研究啊，结果就研究的是就是关于大豆的摄入，还有乳腺癌患者的这种还有乳腺癌患者吃大豆这种情况，结果发现吃大豆比较多的话，可以对乳腺癌的患者的存活也是很有利的。
Soybeans contain a lot of isoflavones, for example, genistein and benzene, and through gut microbiome, they are converted into equal, which has many cardiovascular benefits, also helps in preventing dementia, and helps with the hormonal balance as well.
他说那个大豆含有那种2种异黄酮，然后呢这异黄酮名字我翻译不过来，然后呢在我们的那个健康的肠道菌群的作用下，转化为一个叫 equal 的一种也是一种代谢物啊。他说这种代谢物呢对我们的大脑的健康以及对我们的其他的生理功能都有很好的作用。
We are currently conducting a study for postmenopausal women with hot flushes, and we are using a low-fat vegan diet with half a cup of cooked soybeans every day.
我们现在呢正在做一个就是更年期妇女吃大豆的一个研究啊，我们给他们每一天呢吃半杯的那个大豆。
And it's amazing to see that most women experience less hot flushes within only a few days or weeks on this diet, because partly the soybeans also help with the hormonal balance and help women get rid of the hot flushes as well. So they prevent breast cancer, they increase survival in those who in women who have already had breast cancer, and they also help with postmenopausal hot flushes. So soybeans seem to be like a cure for women.
我们在做，就是刚才那个我还没落掉一点，就是给他们吃半杯大豆之外，还要吃低脂纯素这种饮食。结果他们发现这些妇女他们的这个也就是1-2周的时间，他们的这种潮热的状态呢，就是基本就是很快的就改善或者就完全的消失所以说呢，他说这是一个非常好的一个结果就是那个实际上大豆制品呢是有利于等于说有利于帮助我们预防乳腺癌而且如果有了乳腺癌，可以帮助我们 就是乳腺癌更好的存活，而且呢，对于那个更年期的妇女呢，还可以减少她们的潮热。All right. Thank you so much, Hana. And it's time. Time is up, and I hope next time we'll have more question for you, and we'll have you in our future conferences, if possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Have a great.
感谢克雷欧尔博士精彩的演讲，以及博士和克雷欧尔博士的精彩问答。那么我们今天峰会的最后一位出场的重磅嘉宾呢，是我们的小考德威尔·埃塞斯廷博士。埃塞斯廷博士呢，他是美国著名的心脏病专家，是1994到95年度美国最佳医生的获奖人，是美国心脏病学会 ACC 的院士，美国克利夫兰研究中心心血管疾病预防与逆转项目的负责人，是前乳腺癌手术专家组主席及前列腺手术负责人。他的著作咱们国家翻译是《饮食革命：心血管疾病的预防与逆转》他是这本书的作者。他同时呢，他还曾经获得过奥运会皮划艇的冠军。他的经历是非常传奇的。那么今天呢，埃塞斯廷医生呢将给我们带来预防与逆转心脏病的精彩演讲。我们有请埃塞斯廷医生。
Good morning. My name is Dr. Esselstyn, and I'm excited to experience this new technology, and I have my fingers crossed that it'll work. I've got about 45 minutes to see if we can't cure heart disease, so let's get started. Now, it's interesting that if you were a cardiac surgeon and you decided that you were going to hang out your shingle in Okinawa, rural China, the Papua Highlands, Central Africa, the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. Why? They don't have heart disease. Why? Because they all thrive on whole food, plant-based nutrition without oil. Now, this is a slide that I took when I was leaving Vietnam. I'd spent a year there as a combat surgeon, and I use this to remind the audience that if we autopsy our young GIs who died in combat in Korea, for example, roughly 80% of those GIs will already have gross evidence of coronary artery disease. Not enough for their cardiac events yet, but there it is already established. Now, if we look at a little bit more updated study, this is 1999. This is a study that looked at the autopsy results of young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who had died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. And lo and behold, now the disease is ubiquitous. Not enough for their cardiac events yet, but here this disease is already established. So it's no great surprise as we keep eating the same way that by our 40s and 50s we now have this absolute epidemic of cardiovascular disease, which is the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization. Now here's where we kind of blew it because we had a chance to get it absolutely right. World War II. In World War II, it was interesting that when the Axis powers of Germany overran the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium, and actually they occupied Denmark and Norway, they took away their livestock for their troops. So their cattle, their sheep, their goats, their pigs, their chickens, their turkeys were now suddenly gone. And lo and behold, these Western European nations now had become plant-based. Now, it was interesting that Dr. Strawman Jansen, reporting in England's leading medical journal, The Lancet, in 1951, at the deaths from heart attack and stroke in Norway during this period. So let's look together at this slide, starting here on the far left. And we see On the far left, 1927, deaths from heart attack and stroke in Norway going up to 1930, going up to 1935. Now we get to 1939. In come the Germans. Whoop, down, 1940. Whoop, down, 41. What's going on here? Who knew that these Germans were these great public health educators? Well, actually, look what happened in 1945. Here we had the death of Adolf Hitler. And now suddenly there was cessation of hostilities in the European theater. Back comes the meat. Back comes the dairy. Back come the strokes. Back come the heart attacks. But we just didn't get it. Now here the rubber begins to hit the road, because there is going to be a new bit of vocabulary here. So hopefully you'll bear with me. What you see on the right, obviously, is an artery that is very, very diseased, and you can see that small opening, which is still sustaining the heart muscle, but barely. But interestingly enough, this accounts for only about 10% of heart attacks. Yes, this patient is going to have chest pain. Yes, there's going to be this angina and shortness of breath. But interestingly enough, only about 10% of heart attacks. And we'll see shortly how 90% of heart attacks occur. Now let's focus on the left. Because on the left is that normal artery. And even those of you in the back of the room, shall we say, if you look carefully, you can see that delicate innermost line of 1 or 2 cells thick called the endothelium. And you're going to be hearing a lot about that, because if there are two words I want you to remember from this presentation, one is endothelium and the other is nitric oxide. Now, the first thing that happens when you start eating that Western diet, things get sticky, sticky, sticky with the cellular elements in your bloodstream. Your platelets get sticky. Your white cells get sticky. Your cholesterol and your endothelium get sticky. Now, this is a slide from Peter Libby, who's from Harvard. Now, even though I went to Yale, that's fine. Peter Libby is an absolutely amazing scientist in his study of the endothelium. Now, to orient you a little bit on this slide, the blue area is where the blood is flowing. And at the lower end of the blue area, you will see these tiny single-layer endothelial cells. So let's work together and start on the upper left. And there you see those orange LDL molecules, which are now sticky. So they bump up against the sticky endothelium. And now they migrate into the subendothelial space, where Peter Libby no longer has them orange. They're now yellow because they have been oxidized by free radicals, which are coming from these nasty foods that we eat. And the subendothelial space does not like these small, hard, dense LDL cholesterol particles and calls upon our SWAT team to come across. And those are the cells that are painted blue from Peter Libby, and they painted the white cells blue in honor of Yale. And of course, we like that. Now that macrophage, that white blood cell, begins to gobble up all these small, hard, dense, yellow LDL cholesterol particles, and we cross across the left to right. And as we get far on the right, the macrophage is now absolutely chock full of these small, hard, dense LDL particles. And we in medicine do what we do so often. We change the name. It is now called the foam cell. And the foam cell is truly the Darth Vader of this entire sequence. Why? Because the foam cell manufactures these nasty, nasty metalloproteinases like stromelicin, elastase, myeloperoxidase. What do they do that's so bad? They progressively thin out, here as you see on the left, they thin out the cap over this plaque. And as the cap gets thinner and thinner and thinner, the sheer force of blood ruptures this cap over the plaque. And with that rupture, there is the extravasation, or the oozing out of, if you will, of plaque content into the flowing blood, which activates platelets, our clotting factor. And now in the middle section, we see, following that rupture, a clot is beginning to form. And the clot is in and of itself self-propagating. So suddenly we go all the way over to C on the right, and now the clot is absolutely 100% blocking the artery. All the downstream heart muscle below this is now suddenly deprived of all oxygen and nutrients. It starts to die, and there's your heart attack. 90% of heart attacks. Now, the good news about this is if I do my job correctly today, absolutely every one of you and your friends and relatives should be able to make yourselves heart attack proof. Now, we're not going to do that with another drug. We're not going to do that with a stent. We're not going to do that with an operation. We are going to do it by changing your biochemistry. How do we change your biochemistry? We're going to change it by having you eat whole food, plant-based nutrition. When you do this, this entire cascade of events that I've just shared with you, the stickiness, the migration of the LDL cholesterol into the subendothelial space, the onset of the white blood cells, the formation of the foam cell, all that is eliminated, and your cap doesn't thin out. As a matter of fact, your cap will strengthen. And if you strengthen your cap, it cannot rupture. If it cannot rupture, you have now made yourself heart attack proof. Now, I'm not quite through with the endothelial cell yet, because here you see, forget the X-ray in this slide. I want you to focus on this artery. You can see half of it is filled with plaque and the other half is still open, lined by those endothelial cells. And it was really up until 1980, we used to think of the endothelial cell as merely these cute little red bricks that were lining the pipe. But that all changed in 1980 when Dr. Furchtgott, who was taking the largest blood vessel from the rodent, the aorta, and he made this kind of elliptical cut on this aorta right through the endothelium, immersed it in a bath of saline, and it would constrict. But then one day, no cut, no injury to the endothelium. Immersed it, and it dilated. Did it again, and it dilated. And now the race was on globally. What was the EDRF, endothelial-derived relaxation factor, that Dr. Furchtgott had discovered? And it was fortunate that that term was with us for only 8 years, because at 8 years, Dr. Furchtgott, Dr. Luignaro, and Dr. Murad discovered that the EDRF, the endothelial-derived relaxation factor, was indeed a gas, nitric oxide. For that discovery, those three men in 1998 received the Nobel Prize. Now, why do you receive a Nobel Prize for discovering a gas? Well, because of the absolutely remarkable functions that nitric oxide has. For example, nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed, and protects us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number four, nitric oxide in a normal and plentiful amount will protect us all from ever developing blockages or plaques. So literally everybody on the planet Earth, whether they're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or Peoria, Illinois, if they have cardiovascular disease, it is because by now, in the previous decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into a train wreck that they no longer had enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from making these blockages and plaque. However, the good news is this: this is not a malignancy. And once you can teach patients to never, never, never again pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further destroy an already train-wrecked endothelium. Then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide so we can halt disease progression, and we often will see significant elements of disease reversal. Now, here we've already gone through this. I'm not going to review these again. We've just gone over the functions of this, but in the interest of time. But here is the key. I've spent a fair amount of time today with you having you understand what nitric oxide is and its function, and the fact that it's the endothelial cell that produces it. The other three elements that you see on this slide, we don't have time to discuss today, but let me share with you the fact that they are also part of the body's remarkable defense system against cardiovascular disease. And absolutely every single one of these is optimized when you're eating whole food, plant-based nutrition. So let's go a little bit farther here where the rubber hits the road with some discussion of research that I got involved with. This was back in 1985. And this was a small study because I was still actively involved with my surgical duties at that time. And nothing against women, it's just that that's the way that the patients were sent to me. And they all had severe triple vessel disease. Now, here are the foods that absolutely, every time you consume them, you injure your endothelial cells. Any drop of oil, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures the endothelial cells, as does anything with a mother or a face. Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs. And nothing that is dairy. Milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. I don't like caffeinated coffee. Not listed here, but should be, are nuts and sugar. Now, for those of you who are concerned about where this data comes from, here is a typical example of a peer-reviewed scientific study. Olive, soybean, and palm oil intake have a similar acute detrimental effect over the endothelial function in healthy young subjects. Now, here's some interesting research of an example of why meat and animal protein is so bad. This is the work of Stan Hazen at the Cleveland Clinic. And Stan was looking at the molecules of lecithin and carnitine which are contained in those animal products that you see there. So someone who eats these products, who is an omnivore, he found out that they contain in their microbiome, that is to say their intestinal bacteria of an omnivore, when they metabolize lecithin and carnitine, they produce a molecule called TMA, trimethylamine. And your body rapidly converts the trimethylamine to trimethylamine oxide. Now, what is so bad about trimethylamine oxide? It injures your blood vessels. Here's the schematic. We start on the left. There you see the lecithin and carnitine metabolized by your gut bacteria, TMO, and now we have vascular injury. Now you're probably wondering, what am I doing with this slide in this discussion? Because this is the one slide that has nothing to do with cardiovascular disease. It's about cancer. But I can't resist mentioning it because it was such a moment, I think, of significance in medical history. October of 2015, the WHO, the World Health Organization, imagine this, representatives from every culture throughout the planet were in agreement that now red meat would have the same level of carcinogenicity as smoking cigarettes. All right, back to cardiovascular disease. So what are these patients going to eat? They're going to eat all these marvelous whole grains for their cereal, bread, pasta, rolls, and bagels. And 101 different types of legumes, lentils, and beans, all these marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables, and some fruit. Now, there's something I think we ought to mention here, and that is that just in the last 8.5, 9 years, we have added something that's not on this slide, and that is If patients with heart disease could look inside the artery, they could see that that artery is an absolute cauldron of oxidative inflammation. So we need antioxidants, but no, do not go down to the health store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant, because it doesn't work and it's going to be harmful. I need you to get your antioxidants from food. Fair enough. What food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value, ORAC, oxygen radical absorptive capacity. So this means that if you're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries on your morning oat cereal, that's a terrific start. However, nothing can trump the antioxidant value of green leafy vegetables. So I need you to chew. I need you to chew not smoothies, not juicing. I need you to chew, if you're a heart patient, a green leafy vegetable 6 times a day, roughly the size of 3/4 of your fist, after it has first been boiled in water, 5.5 to 6 minutes, so it's now nice and tender. Then you must anoint it with several drops of a delightful rice or balsamic vinegar. Why? Because the acetic acid has been shown to restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So you're going to chew this alongside your breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with your luncheon sandwich, that's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course, I adore it when you have that evening snack of kale. Number 6. Now, there's another benefit from chewing the greens. When you chew the greens, you restore the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make more endothelial progenitor cells. What do? The endothelial progenitor cells replace your senescent, injured, worn-out endothelial cells. And finally, number 3, the third benefit from eating the green leafy vegetables, and this is key. When you are eating a green leafy vegetable, you are eating a nitrate. As you are chewing that nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria are going to reduce that green nitrate that you're chewing to a nitrite. And now, when you swallow the nitrite, your own gastric acid is going to reduce that nitrite to more nitric oxide, which can enter your nitric oxide pool. So now think about it. With minimal expense, with no hideous side effect, from dawn to dusk, you are absolutely restoring nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which has given you this disease in the first place. Pretty exciting. Now you're probably asking, I wonder what the green leafy vegetables are. They are, ready? Bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top 5 are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, and beet greens. Look what it does for your memory. No oil. Just a little time for humor. All right. Now let's look at some angiograms to sort of see about this business of disease reversal. These angiograms were all reviewed in the Cleveland Clinic Angiography Core Laboratory in triplicate by senior technicians that do this all day long for national medical trials. So when I give you a percentage of reversal, I know it's correct. This first one is a 67-year-old retired pediatrician, the left anterior descending coronary artery. The arrow on the left, you can see, and then on the right, you can see there has been a 10% improvement. This is about as small an improvement as the naked eye can see. However, easier to see in this circumflex artery in a 68-year-old factory worker, and it was described from the left to the right as a 20% improvement. This next gentleman is a 54-year-old security guard, and from the arrow on the left to the right, that was described as a 30% improvement. Now, this gentleman is Joe Crow, who was a surgical colleague of mine. At age 44 in 1996, he began to get chest pain. His cholesterol was 156. He was not diabetic. He was not hypertensive. His cholesterol was 156. He had no strong family history, and he exercised regularly. Still, chest pain. Cardiology worked him up in October of 1996, could find nothing. A month later, he finished his surgical schedule and sat down to write post-operative orders when suddenly he got this crushing chest pain, and he was having a heart attack. He was whipped down to the cath lab. They started the catheterization. He had a cardiac arrest, resuscitated, finished the catheterization, one more cardiac arrest, and then he was sent up to the floors to stabilize and was discharged 3 days later, but very depressed. Why was he so depressed? Because at the time of his angiogram, they found that the entire lower one-third of his left anterior descending, the widowmaker artery, was now significantly moth-eaten and diseased. So he was very depressed, and so Ann and I had Joe and his wife out for dinner 2 weeks after his heart attack. Joe, come on. You've been eating this horrible Western diet. You've got the typical disease. Why don't you think about going plant-based? We've got 10 years of data. All right, S, they couldn't offer me anything else. They said that the artery was too diseased for a stent and too far down for bypass. So I think I'll give it a shot. But I'm not going to take any of those statin drugs. I said, fine, that's your call. No problem. Well, Joe became the absolute personification of commitment. And over the next 2.5 years, his total cholesterol plummeted. His LDL went from 98 to 38. And then 2.5 years after his heart attack, he had another angiogram. And I think you can see here, the disease is gone. Now, that's pretty exciting. And when the patient is relatively young, and most specifically, when the plaque or the blockage is young and made up of cholesterol, fat, and inflammation, the body can do a remarkable job of reversing it. However, in the older patients, where the plaque has been there for decades and it's made up of scar and fibrosis and calcification, it's not going to perhaps go away. But nevertheless, it's so exciting to see how those patients just as well can benefit. And it's going to be my job, before we end this discussion, to show you how that happens. Now, here's another example of reversal. This happens to be, this time, in the state of Massachusetts. Joe was from Ohio, and I wanted to be sure to let you know that this process will also work in Massachusetts. This was a 46-year-old gentleman with a 90% blockage in his left anterior descending. You can see here, it was July of 2017. He was told he had to have bypass. He declined, and a year later, his cardiologist said, let's see what's happening to that. And here we are, July of 2018. It's really getting a lot better. And they decided to check it out one more time. And here we are, January of 2020. It's absolutely gone. So it works in Massachusetts. Kind of fun. Now, for this study, I had wanted to know, in these patients, that is the 18 patients who stuck with us through this 12-year study, I wanted to know, in the 8 years prior to coming into our study, how many coronary events of worsening disease under expert cardiovascular care had occurred in these 18 patients. And you can see here, it was 49 events described as you see categorized here. But once they came into our program, these same 18 patients, after 12 years, 17 had no further events. Yes, we had one little sheep, after 6 years, wandered from the flock, got into the French fries, glazed donuts, and lamb chops, had angina and had to have the bypass, but he's now back with the flock. But he proves the point that I'm trying to share with you today. Now, as exciting as I was to see these kinds of results in the early 1990s, not everybody in the cardiovascular community was excited about this, and they complained that the study was small, it wasn't prospective, it wasn't randomized. And so we did another study that was reported in July of 2014 in the Journal of Family Practice. This time, we looked at 200 patients. 177 of those were compliant over close to 4 years. And it was interesting that, to me, what was so exciting was that meant that 89.3% or close to 90% of patients would agree with what we were doing. Now, why did we have a success rate of 90%? Because most physicians say that they can't get patients to change or eat this way. I think if you're going to get patients to do a lifestyle change, you have to show the patient respect. And our program is a single-day program with 6 hours. In those 6 hours, patients are going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we are going to empower them as the locus of control. They receive a very hefty notebook in addition to 2 books on heart disease. And every one of these patients will have an opportunity to speak with me 2 weeks before they come to our seminar. Because I'm old-fashioned enough that when my secretary gives me a list of who's coming with their phone numbers, I really want to get my arms around their story and at the same time provide them with an opportunity to ask questions of me so that coming to the seminar we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward. Because if you're going to try to get a patient to make a lifestyle change in a 12 or 15-minute office visit without the spouse, boy, you've been smoking something. That's just not going to happen. So here we are again, the 89.3% who were compliant. But what about the events that occurred? In the patients who were adherent, there was 1 small stroke in a patient who misbehaved while he was in China. So literally 99.4% had no further events. The non-adherent patients, 62% had events. So I wanted to compare our results with some of the well-known cardiovascular studies out there. And if we start here looking at the box on the right, this is the Mediterranean diet with the Lyon Diet Heart Study that after 4 years, 25% of those patients had had a recurrent either heart attack, stroke, or death. The next box at 20.4% is Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. The natural history of coronary disease at the end of 4 years, 20%. In the next box, 19%, that's Bill Bowden's Courage study. And then farthest on the left, here we are at 0.6%. That's over a 30-fold difference. What are we doing that makes our patients survive? And I think there's no question that what happens here is this. The patients are going to learn exactly how this disease works. Because really there's been a basic covenant of trust since the days of Hippocrates that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of their illness. But sadly today in cardiovascular medicine, that's not being done. So what do we see with this? With the diet, there is no mortality with the diet. There's no morbidity with the diet. And the benefits improve with time. And most exciting for these patients, by and large, patients who have had a heart attack are absolutely walking around with this sort of Damocles over their head, wondering when will the other shoe fall? When are they going to get their next heart attack? Nonsense. These patients are absolutely empowered with the knowledge that they are in control of the disease that was destroying their lives. Now, I want to look briefly here on the left. What you see is a pulse volume at the ankle of a gentleman who was in our earlier group, who when he crossed the skyway to my office, he had to stop 5 times because of claudication, that is to say, pain in his right calf muscle, because he had this blocked artery in his thigh. And it was interesting that after several years, we noticed that, no, actually it was after 11 months, after I started seeing him, on an office visit, because I was so focused on his heart, I'd forgotten all about his leg. 11 months after we started seeing him, he said, Dr. Esselstyn, do you recall when I first saw you, I was walking across the skyway having to stop 5 times for the pain in my calf? He said, yes. He said, you know, in the last month, it got down to 4 times, 3 times, 2 times once. He said, I don't stop anymore. The pain is gone. I said, okay, Don, back you go to the vascular lab. And now look on the right. You will see that his pulse volume within 11 months had absolutely doubled. So you not only can reverse this disease in the heart, but you can reverse it in the legs. And it also happens to happen in the carotid arteries to the neck as well. Now here's another patient who was he was a 78-year-old retired high school chemistry teacher. And in his retirement, he and his wife loved to enter these square dances. And it was during the fast square dance that he noticed he was getting bilateral calf pain, calf claudication. Well, he went to see these vascular surgeons who got the image that you see here on the right. And he was not very enthralled with the large operation that they were proposing for him. So he found us over the internet, came for counseling, and said, Dr. Esselstyn, if I choose your method, how long will it take me to get rid of this calf pain? So I looked at him with great wisdom in my face and said, well, probably about 10 or 11 months. Well, interesting enough, 3 months after I saw him, I got a phone call. Dr. Esselstyn, you do not speak the truth. The pain is gone. Now, we all know that there is a pattern of commercial presentations in Cleveland that will go a little bit like this. When the moment is right, will you be ready? Now, we all know that the penile artery is really quite tiny compared to the coronary artery that goes to the heart. So not infrequently, men will notice that before they come down with heart disease, that they may no longer be able to raise the flag. However, all is not lost, not infrequently. 10 or 11 months after I've counseled somebody, I'll get a phone call. Dr. Esselstyn, yes, this is Mr. So-and-so. Sure enough. Yeah, I said, I really thought I ought to give you a call because recently something has come up. And I'm wondering if I don't owe you another check. All right. Now, here's my promise that we're going to talk about how these patients, where you don't get rid of the plaque, how they get back to full activity of daily living. What you're seeing here on the left is a PET rubidium dipyridamole scan, a PET scan. And if it is orange or yellow, there's good blood supply. But you can see there's one segment where it's all green, and that's a poor blood supply. Now, this gentleman happened to be a downtown Cleveland stockbroker with a cholesterol of 248. So I counseled him at the time of his PET scan, and sure enough, 10 days later, his cholesterol was down to 137. And then 3 weeks after the first PET scan, we got it repeated, and it was now back to normal. Now, I was totally puzzled by this because nobody washes out a blockage or a plaque in 3 weeks, and yet here the blood supply had returned to normal. So at this point, I had an opportunity to get this slide. And you can see those 3 major coronary arteries, which initially, as they come out to the heart, they ride on the surface of the heart. They are the epicardial coronary arteries. And what do? They all dive into the heart muscle, because this is the heart with no muscle you're looking at. All these vessels dive into the heart muscle where they interdigitate and connect, and there's this cascade of literally thousands of these arteries. So after this puzzling situation, I called our cardiovascular pathologist, Rodriguez, who does dissect roughly 200 hearts a year from the deceased. And I said, Rod, how often do you ever see good old garden variety plaque once the artery has dived into the heart muscle? His answer, never. Maybe once in a very great while with a severe diabetic, otherwise never. Now I had the answer. When we see these patients initially, their endothelial cells are so absolutely beaten down that the endothelial cell is now your enemy. Not only is it unable to make much of any nitric oxide, but it is now manufacturing two molecules, endothelin and thromboxane, which are vasoconstrictors. They narrow and pinch these blood vessels. And so what happens now is really quite exciting. Once these patients get it right, they stop eating anything that is going to further injure the endothelial cell. There is enough recovery so we get more nitric oxide to dilate the artery. The thromboxane molecule and the endothelin are gone. And what happens is we have this enormous dilatation of this entire intramuscular cascade. And when that happens, then of course we get this remarkable increase in flow. Pretty exciting how that happens. It's so exciting to see patients really get rid of their angina so promptly. So let's summarize. What are the ways that you can manifest disease reversal? You can see reversal on a coronary angiogram. We showed you. You can see reversal on the stress test. I showed you the PET scan reversal. Then there is reversal with the carotid ultrasound, the pulse volume I've shown you, and then the three symptoms of angina, claudication, and erectile dysfunction will reverse. Now, I always like to show this slide, which is the so-called A building, the Crowell building, and for many years I worked on the 8th floor as a surgeon. But for those of you who haven't been to Cleveland in February, I'd like to show you what the what the trees look like. And after I retired from surgery, though, and I got so involved and so excited about the reversal of cardiovascular disease, I was hired at the Wellness Institute. And although the Wellness Institute budget is more modest, the morale really is quite high. And lastly, I always like to finish up by talking about the importance really of persistence. No question, brains are important, but nothing quite as important as persistence, best exemplified by this young damsel, 1939, trying to learn how to do the splits, and it is tough. But she stuck with it and stuck with it and stuck with it, and sure enough, the other day, downtown Cleveland, somebody spotted her, and she had got it right. Now, I'd simply like to wrap it up and say that it has been my honor and my privilege to share this information with you today. And I guess the reason that I stay so optimistic about medicine in general is that I really feel that we are on the absolute cusp of a seismic revolution. And the seismic revolution in health that is before us is never going to happen with the invention of a pill, another procedure, another operation. But the seismic revolution that is in front of us today is we are going to have the will and the grit and the determination really to show the public what is the lifestyle that will empower them through nutritional literacy to absolutely annihilate chronic illness. Thank you for your time.
感谢艾塞斯汀医生的精彩的演讲啊，他是一位顶尖的外科医生啊，一位89岁的老人，到现在呢还在不遗余力的在对我们进行这种生活方式的推广和普及啊，我们真的是就是非常的荣幸啊，能够听到他的演讲。下面呢，我们会请徐佳博士啊连线艾塞斯汀医生啊进行现场的互动和问答啊。博士可以连线。其实埃塞医生最后的这个演说是非常激动人心的啊，我们真是在健康领域，我们要掀起一场颠覆性的革命啊！到底是什么样的生活方式啊，才是真正的对我们的健康、对我们的慢病逆转最有效的？好，可以，有请博士。
I can hear you. That's it. Let's do it. Yes. All right. Well, the whole idea of how a heart attack occurs is when the cap over the plaque ruptures. And the cap is made of endothelium. And it's when we eat certain foods, we develop what we call a foam cell. And the foam cell makes these enzymes that progressively erode the cap over the plaque. So it gets thinner and thinner and thinner until it finally ruptures. And when it ruptures, that's when the clot in the artery begins to form. And that blocks the artery and causes the heart attack. What is the so the way to avoid a heart attack is to eliminate the food that are going to promote the foam cell. That is what thins out the cap over the plaque. So it's really very simple. You eat the right food, and it does not injure the artery wall. I mean, you have to remember that there are many cultures on this planet where heart disease is non-existent. Why? Because they all eat whole food, plant-based nutrition without oil.
好的，我来。请大家稍微等一下啊，那边可能是有一些转播的问题啊，大家耐心稍微等一下，我们的志愿者马上在处理。
We are actually. I think it's all right now. Okay. Okay, sorry, Dr. Esselstyn. We may have to do it again because they couldn't listen. They couldn't hear us. I think it's because I was using one computer and we're doing two things, and I'm projecting this to China, and then they somehow lost the soundtrack. Okay, we start again. Okay, let me see from here. Okay. Dr. Esselstyn, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. We believe it will help many people make life-changing decisions. It reminds me of Dr. Kim Williams' phrase, there are two kinds of physicians, vegans and those who haven't read the data. It is so true. We really appreciate your gracing our conference. Do you have time to take some questions from the audience?
Please, I'm delighted. Yes.
All right, let me translate them for you first. OK， 第一个问题啊，低脂纯素之后，血管粥样硬化斑块会不会掉下来形成栓塞？Could atherosclerotic plaques fall out and cause embolism after a low-fat vegan diet?
No, the nice thing about eating plant-based, when you're eating plant-based, you are not eating the foods that are going to cause heart disease. The foods that cause heart disease are oil, dairy, animal protein, and too much sugar.
Esselstyn 医生说啊，他说那个我们吃植物性的食物的时候呢，最好的情况是因为我们没有在吃导致心脏病的这种食物。那么导致心脏病的食物是什么呢？就是油还有就是动物性的蛋白以及动物性的，对，就是动物性的食物。Go ahead.
Our research has shown that if you can take patients with heart disease, and if they are willing to make this significant nutritional change, they can not only stop the progression of heart disease, but we have often seen examples of disease reversal.
我们的实验告诉我们，如果这个心脏病的病人他愿意来听取我们的意见，来改变他们的这个饮食的话，那么这种饮食不光有可能停止他这个心脏病的继续发展，甚至呢可以导致这个心脏病的逆转。
Yeah, but the interesting thing is that we now understand that where this disease has its inception, its beginning, its onset, is if we are eating the Western diet, we will progressively injure that delicate innermost lining of the artery called the endothelium. And what makes the endothelium so important is that it manufactures a molecule of gas, nitric oxide, which is responsible for the salvation and the protection of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable function.
西方式饮食它的最主要的问题之一呢，它就是它能够不断的去破坏我们的血管的内皮细胞， 而血管内皮细胞呢，很重要的一个功能就是合成一氧化氮，而这个一氧化氮对我们血管的功能非常的重要。
So it's important to know what are the functions of nitric oxide that make it so magical and protective of our arteries. One, nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements in our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Translate that, and then I'll give you the rest.
OK，Esselstyn 医生说，因为这个一氧化氮这么重要啊，我们应该先了解一下一氧化氮有什么功能。第一个功能呢，它可以使这个我们的血管的这个状态呢，就像一个非常平滑的一个表面，而不是那种就像那种叫什么就是有毛刺的那种表面，使得我们的血流呢非常的流畅。第二个呢，就是它是最重要的一个血管的一个扩张剂，它可以导致我们血管的扩张。
Now, the third function of nitric oxide is nitric oxide will protect the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed. It will protect us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number four, this is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount will protect us all. Ever developing any blockages or plaque.
好，就是它能够使我们的让它发炎变硬然后它的功能失常。最后一个第四个可以What was the first, the fourth one, the last one, the last function of?
Safe amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from ever developing blockages or plaque.
第四个功能呢，就是一个正常、一个安全的这个剂量的一氧化氮呢，可以帮助我们的血管保持它的正常的这个保护我们的血管，使它不去被堵塞掉。
Therefore, everybody on the planet Earth who has cardiovascular disease has, whether they're from London, Berlin, Beijing, Chicago, or New York, they have their disease because in the preceding decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into a train wreck, they no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from making blockages and plaque.
所以说，对于所有地球上所有的人，不管你是欧洲、美洲还是亚洲任何一个地方的人，那么他们之所以会出现心脏病的突发，是因为他们在之前的若干十几年若干年，他们不断的用他们这种错误的饮食来伤害他们的血管内皮细胞。
Now, the good news is that this is not a malignancy. This is a completely benign foodborne illness. And once you can get patients to understand that never again are they to pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further injure an already train-wrecked endothelium, then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide so we can not only halt disease progression, but we often will see elements of disease reversal.
但是好处呢，就是说这种动脉硬化它和癌症不一样它是可以被逆转的当我们采取正确的饮食来停止对我们血管内皮细胞的伤害的时候呢我们就会逐步的看到血管内皮细胞的改善以及血管功能的改善
Now, what are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure the endothelial cells. They are 1, any drop of oil, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures endothelial cells.
那么到底是什么食物会导致会那个破坏我们的血管内皮呢？它包括所有的植物性的食物啊，包括热带的食物啊，那个叫棕榈油、橄榄油，也包括我们日常的其他的植物性的油，包括比如红花油。等各种各样的植物性的油都是以及包括存在于加工性食物里面的一些油，比如说我们的饼干里面的油等等等等都包括。
Also, so does animal protein injures the endothelial cells. Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs.
那么同时呢，那个动物蛋白也会破坏也会伤害我们的内皮细胞啊，这个包括肉、白肉、红肉，包括鱼啊，包括所有的动物性的蛋白。
And so does dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt injure endothelial cells.
还包括所有的奶制品啊，比如说奶酪。就是奶油，所有的奶制品都会破坏我们的内皮细胞。
And also sugary foods, cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey.
还有所有的这种甜的食物啊，就含有糖的食物啊，包括就是蔗糖啊。各种各样的糖，也包括我们说的那种叫枫树糖浆，也包括对，就是还有那个蜂蜜啊，所有这些含有糖的食物都包括。
And also, peanuts, peanut butter, nut butters, cashew sauce, avocado.
也包括花生啊，那个花生酱以及各种坚果酱啊，都包括。
And now, what are the foods that we want you to eat?
好，那么现在你应该吃什么呢
We want you to eat all those marvelous whole grains, whole grains, WHOLE, whole grains. And 101 different types of legumes, lentils, and beans.
那么我们应该吃什么呢？就包括全谷类，也就是包括我们的粗粮的那个全麦啊，那个就是全麦面啊，或者那种糙米啊，也包括所有的各种豆类都可以。
All those marvelous red, green, and yellow vegetables, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, and some fruit.
还有所有的各种五颜六色的蔬菜，那个土豆啊、红薯啊，还有各种水果。
Now, one of the things that we have just added in the last 10 years to help find more nitric oxide is the research that shows the importance of eating green leafy vegetables.
在过去10年里面，我们加入的一个食物能够帮助我们产生更多的一氧化氮，就是深绿色的蔬菜，就是绿叶蔬菜。
The reason that this is important is that the endothelial production of nitric oxide is age dependent. So when you are 50 years of age, your endothelial cell manufacturing of nitric oxide is now 50% of what it was when you were age 25.
之所以我们要做这样的一氧化碳的补充，是因为随着我们的年龄的增加，我们的内皮细胞生产一氧化碳的能力呢会减弱。在你50岁的时候啊，比起年轻的时候，我们的一氧化碳生成会减少一半。
So we need to take advantage of the new research in the last 12 years that has shown us that mankind has an alternate pathway for making nitric oxide.
在过去12年，科学的数据告诉我们，人类有另外一个途径可以产生一氧化氮。
And that method has us, for my patients with heart disease, I like them to chew, not smoothies, not juicing. I like them to chew a green leafy vegetable, roughly the size of half of their fist, 6 times a day, after it has first been boiled in water, nice and tender. And then we like them to add several drops of a delightful balsamic or rice vinegar.
我让我的病人现在呢是做的一件事就是每一天要吃6次把它完全煮熟的这种绿色蔬菜，上面呢再点上一些就是醋。
Because the research has shown us that the acetic acid from the rice vinegar or the balsamic vinegar will restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide.
因为有研究告诉我们，这种酸性的环境能够帮助我们激活我们内皮细胞的生产，也不就这些醋里面所含的这个成分嘛，可以激活我们内皮细胞所可以生产一氧化氮这种能力。
So I like the patient to chew this alongside their breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with their lunch and sandwich, that's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and I adore it when they have that evening snack of kale or arugula.
那这个六餐的6次吃这个深绿色蔬菜怎么吃呢？就是在早餐的时候呢，吃一份就是咀嚼这个深绿色的蔬菜，然后呢，在早餐和中餐之间加餐再咀嚼一次，然后到了中餐，我们再配上这么一个深绿色蔬菜的这么一个小就是一碟菜，然后到下午再吃一次，到晚上呢再吃一次他说你如果能在傍晚就是在睡前就是在晚上饿的时候夜宵的时候呢，你如果再吃一份深绿色的蔬菜来咀嚼的话，那么他认为是最棒的。
Now the second benefit from chewing the greens is that it restores the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make the endothelial progenitor cell. What do? The endothelial progenitor cell
这些生内皮细胞的这种母细胞这种母细胞呢，它可以能够就是如果我们的内皮细胞被破坏掉之后，可以被这个可以给。
Now, the third benefit from chewing the greens, and this is most important. When you're chewing the green, you are chewing a green nitrate. As you chew the green nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. And those bacteria will reduce the green nitrate that you are chewing to a nitrite.
第三个优势就是，当我们通过不断的咀嚼这些绿叶菜的时候，这些绿叶菜里面所含的硝酸盐可以被我们口腔里面的细菌把它还原成亚硝酸盐。
Now, when you swallow the green nitrite, it is your own gastric acid, which is further going to reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide, which can enter your nitric oxide pool.
而这些亚硝酸盐进入到我们的胃里面，又被我们胃里面的酸把它们进一步的还原成一氧化氮这样的话，我们身体里面的一氧化氮的这个池子就变得更大就有更多的一氧化氮。
So think about it. For minimal expense, no side effects, all day long, from dawn to dusk, morning to night, you are absolutely replacing nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which gave you this disease in the first place.
用最小的成本，然后呢，我们从早到晚，我们不断的用这种方法来增加你身体里面这种一氧化氮，而这种分子呢的缺乏或者这种分子产生的障碍，恰恰就造成我们现在所说的这种心脏病的一个根源。
Now there is a caveat here. Toothpaste with fluoride, public drinking water with fluoride, or mouthwash will injure the beneficial bacteria in your mouth.
含有氟的这种牙膏，以及我们的水，就是饮用水里面的牙膏，而且呢还包括就是另外一种，就是一个是牙膏，还有就他们西方人用的这种漱口里面的这个杀菌的这种漱口水，都可以杀掉我们口腔里面的细菌，这些益生菌。
Right. So that is a very exciting way and a very safe way to restore more nitric oxide. Now, you're probably wondering, what are the green leafy vegetables I'm talking about?
所以这是一种非常的令人就是兴奋，而且呢是一种非常安全的方法来使你来重新提供你身体更多的一氧化氮。那下面你可能想问，那么这些那个绿色蔬菜都包括些什么？
The green leafy vegetables are, there's a lot here, and I'll give the first 5 slowly, but they are bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top 6 are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets.
好，Esselstyn医生说，那这些深绿色蔬菜都包括些什么？那么我没有记住所有的，但是最前面6个啊，第一个呢是羽衣甘蓝，然后他还说到了那个就是菠菜还有呢就是甜菜头的那个上面的那个长出那个叶子，还有一些我就不太知道怎么翻译的一些绿叶，反正是一个绿颜色的蔬菜包括一个叫 Swiss chard， 就是叫瑞士的一种也是一种甘蓝，基本都是一种甘蓝类的菜。
You asked me the questions now. That because if you can do that, what we talked about, you can make yourself heart attack proof.
那么如果这么吃的话，你可以使你自己不会发生心脏病心梗或者心脏病突发。That's a very long answer, Dr. Esselstyn. Thank you so much for this answer. I think our audience will be very satisfied. Let me ask you 2 more questions and then we'll finish. The next question. Okay. 已经吃素多年，但身体不舒服去就医时，有医生说是吃素吃坏了，那是不是这样 ？Okay. I have been a vegetarian for many years, but when I felt sick and see doctors, some doctor would tell me that my illness is due to my diet. Is that true? What should I do?
Well, all treatment is predicated on having an accurate diagnosis.
所有的疾病的治疗，最重要的呢是要有一个，首先要有一个非常准确的就是叫检测就是诊断。
So the first thing would be to have an accurate diagnosis, and because it's extremely unlikely if somebody is eating the entire range of vegetables with a vegetarian diet, they are not going to have any nutritional deficiency. We have to find out what is the absolute accurate diagnosis.
首先我们必须要找到真正正确的诊断，因为如果我们吃这种全植物性的这种饮食的话，很难出现营养不良。
Because once the accurate diagnosis is achieved, then we can apply the appropriate treatment.
一旦我们达成非常准确的诊断，我们才能够给出一个比较合适的治疗方案。Okay. The next question. Okay. 甘油三酯高能吃鸡蛋吗？如何通过调整饮食让甘油三酯逐渐的降下来 ？I have a high TG. Can I eat eggs? How should I adjust my diet to lower my TG? Triglyceride.
Yeah, triglycerides, you want to eliminate the simple carbohydrates. Too much fruit, avoid fruit juice, avoid white flour. Alcohol is notorious for it. And the other thing that can help, maybe if the patient would try consuming a half a teaspoon daily of amla powder, AMLA, amla powder, which is from gooseberries.
他的那个 Esselstyn 医生讲的就是高甘油三酯那么我们需要注意的呢，一个是就是精致的碳水化合物，就是非常简单的碳水化合物比如说精米面这种糖，还有那种酒精这些呢都是会增加甘油三酯的他们不是有一些研究发现有这么一种莓果它叫 amla 那个这种莓果的一种粉状的粉是可以帮助降低甘油三酯的。Okay, thank you. Okay, one more. Let's get one more. Okay. 使上性心动过速是怎么形成的？可以通过改变生活方式而非药而愈吗？ What causes supraventricular tachycardia? Can this condition be healed through lifestyle changes?
Well, again, it's so important to have an absolute accurate diagnosis. What is causing the supraventricular tachycardia? And once that reason is established, then the appropriate treatment can come about. It would be unfair of me to tell you that whole food plant-based nutrition is going to cure all supraventricular tachycardias. We have to know what is the cause. It might be necessary to use an ablation.
好，S 医生说的，还是这样，就是非常重要。首先要确认一个非常好，要明确一个非常正确的诊断，到底是什么导致的这种史上性动脉叫什么？就是心动过速，只有找到它的原因，我们才能够给出一个正确的一个治疗方法。那么他就说并不能够我们不能就是这么一概的而说，就说所有的这个素食啊，健康的素食就能够把所有的史上性动脉过速来治好啊。也许啊，在这个过程中需要做一个消融术。Okay, I think we have all the I mean most of the questions answered. And actually, you in your first long answer, you answered several of the questions people already asked. So I think we don't have to repeat them again. Thank you so much, Dr. Esselstyn, and for your wisdom. And I think all the Chinese people around the world who are listening to this Q&A session and also your talk would definitely benefit for your for all your work you have done for mankind.
Thank you for helping. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're so excited and so happy to have you today, and wish you a good health and long life, and also hopefully we in the future will also have the chance to have you with us in our future conferences.
Thank you. It's been my honor.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
好，我们感谢Esselstyn医生和博士给大家带来的这个精彩的问答互动，我们都特别的开心，也特别的兴奋，然后也特别的惊叹，89岁高龄的这个埃塞医生啊，拥有如此惊人的记忆力然后给我们也提供了那么多的优质的选择。那么我们稍等一下等博士回到直播间，我们今天全天的这个精彩的这个峰会呢，已经进入了尾声。一会儿我们将请出徐佳博士，为我们致闭幕词。稍等一下博士回到直播间。也特别感谢我们的观众朋友们全天的观看，然后倾力的转发，然后我们志愿者的不懈的努力然后有一些小小的瑕疵呢，也希望大家能够理解一如既往的支持我们的非药儿育平台。然后我们也将在这个今年的10月16号呢，给大家带来我们的第3届肿瘤的非药物逆转专题主题峰会。如果想关注这方面的信息呢，那就请您关注非药儿育公众号，然后我们所有的知识，然后我们所有的一些峰会的信息，然后一些科普知识，还有一些大咖的演讲的信息呢，都将会在这个公众号上发布。我们也将这个不定期的给大家举办科普的讲座和线上的直播敬请朋友们期待。博士。稍等一下博士还没有回到直播间。
喂，我可以上了吗？
可以，博士您开麦吧。
好，
可以开始。 那么请博士给我们致闭幕词。有请博士。
OK， 非常感谢Esselstyn医生，还有咱们观众们的精彩互动啊！感谢今天晚上的2位英文嘉宾，也感谢咱们今天白天咱们多位国内的生活方式的饮食的践行者和推广者啊，非常感谢大家。给大家带来一个非常棒的一场盛宴哈！不知不觉全天的主题演讲在谈笑间呢，我们就慢慢的结束了。相信大家我们今天所有的嘉宾的分享也给您带来了深刻的一个思考。第2届国际营养和生活方式医学峰会心脑血管主题峰会呢到此圆满结束。请允许我代表主办方中华生活方式医学会，还有非药儿育平台，感谢所有的嘉宾给大家带来的精彩演讲，感谢所有的转播平台，还有合作单位感谢所有的幕后的志愿者们，你们的努力为大家奉献了一场完美的科学盛宴。同时呢，我们也感谢所有的观众的参会的观众希望这是您健康生活的全新的起点。同时呢，如果本次峰会能够给您提供新的思路改变信心和勇气，我们也将由衷的希望在不久的将来能听到您慢病逆转和痊愈的好消息那么在不久的将来，我们还会举办更加精彩的主题峰会，为朋友们提供不同慢病的解决方案。2030健康中国让我们一起努力构建全人健康，做自己健康的第一责任人。感谢大家，下届峰会我们再见祝大家晚安。
好，感谢博士的致辞，也感谢观众们的聆听。然后我们下届峰会10月16号再见。感谢大家，祝大家晚安。
晚安，再见。